This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by. This is the broadcast from City Hall, the home of the Greater London Authority. Please stand by.
Welcome to today's meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee. Thank you for joining us as we carefully examine the plans related to the London Plan consultation. Our focus will be on two key areas: the potential release of Greenbelt and Metropolitan open land sites for housing development and the proposed industrial and economic strategy. Before we get started, I would like to remind everyone to please switch their phones to silent mode. I also ask that members and guests position their electronic devices away from their microphones. Also, please adjust your microphone so that you can be heard clearly. If you need to adjust your microphone, remember to lift it from the base. Members of the public might like to follow at London Assembly on X and use the hashtag #AssemblyPlanning for this meeting. Before we begin, we have a few items of business to attend to. Can I now ask our committee clerk, Sal Fazal, to confirm any apologies for today's meeting?
Thank you, Chair. Apologies have been received from Assembly Member Moema. And in accordance with Standing Order 8.2, Assembly Members Wilson and Bukhari are attending the meeting as non-voting observers. Additionally, in accordance with Standing Order 2.4, with the permission of the Chair, Assembly Member Bukhari is joining the meeting remotely. Thank you.
Can I ask the committee to note the recommendations set out at item 2 and ask if members have any other interest to declare? Noted. I propose that we take agenda items 3, 4 and 5 together. Can I ask the committee to note the membership and chairing arrangements, terms of reference and standing delegations of authority for the Planning and Regeneration Committee as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual general meeting on 6th of May 2025. Can we confirm the minutes of the committee meeting held on 2nd of April 2025 to be signed by me as a correct record? Can we note the completed, closed and ongoing actions arising from the committee's previous meetings? No. Can we note the actions taken by the former chair of the committee under delegated authority following consultation with party group lead members to agree the committee's reports and letter as outlined in the agenda report? No. We now move to our main item of business, a discussion on the London Plan consultation. Today's discussion will be split into two panels. I would like to welcome our guests for the first panel. Rob Anderson, Research Director at the Centre for London, Sarah Bevan, Director of Planning and Development at Business London, Lisa Fairmainer, Head of London Plan and Strategic Planning at the Greater London Authority, and Celeste Ducey, Team Leader Strategic Planning, Greater London Authority. The first question I will ask, and it is to you all, what are the challenges and opportunities facing London's economy, and how can these be addressed via the new London Plan? Start with from left to right, so start with Celeste and Lisa.
Thank you. I guess the opportunities, a lot of them have been highlighted in the London Growth Plan, so the growing sectors and what's needed to support those, and that's where the London Plan can come in. Obviously, the London Growth Plan was supported by the boroughs, London councils and wider stakeholders, whereas the London Plan will need to focus on a spatial land use strategy. So saying that, we need to ensure that there's sufficient land for economic activities, that these are available, I guess, where they're needed across London for various sectors and at price points that the various sectors can afford. The challenges at the moment are, I guess, the wider economic environment, but that's not necessarily in the control of the London Plan. We just need to provide the flexibility to cater for that. So currently the economic challenges are quite high, so you might need slightly more restrictive or flexible policies either way to support various uses. But then over time, where there may be more investment in certain economies, then you need to enable those sectors to grow. So, for example, at the moment, if high streets are struggling, you might want the flexibility to ensure that there's sufficient kind of flexibility to allow the spaces to be occupied. But in the future, when there's higher demand, you may need to protect some of those more vulnerable uses that that can at least afford the high street rents.
Thank you. Just to add to what Celeste has already said, there's opportunities obviously from Use Class E. These were changes made before the last London plan that need to be resolved in the current plan, and that speaks to the flexibility that Celeste spoke about earlier. So although we had concerns about Use Class E, it's also an opportunity. I think revisiting our town centres, both there was already a decline in bricks and mortar activity. We need to rethink what town centres are for and what crucial roles they play in providing a range of employment opportunities for communities, and also recognising the drag on the economy and on productivity of housing and housing affordability and the lack of availability of housing supply. So all of those things are huge opportunities in the next London plan.
Thank you. In addition to the points that Lisa and Celeste have already made, I think we have the significant shifts in working patterns since the pandemic. There was some evidence last week that suggested that more employees in London spend more of their working week working from home than in any of our European peers. And that's obviously having an impact on supply and demand in the office sector, which remains very strong in certain locations, but it means that we're dealing with a very different commercial environment compared to when the previous London Plan policies were drafted, and the need to look in particular at the future of the central activities zone, making sure that it remains the powerhouse of the UK economy, but at the same time making sure it's fit for purpose with new working patterns and so on. The other challenge facing the economy is the shortage of industrial land and a lot of tenants being priced out further and further into the wider southeast, which has a massive problem in terms of logistics, bringing goods and services into London, particularly into central London, and meeting net zero targets when goods are having to move such long distances. And this also undermines, the very intrinsic ecosystem that we have, supporting all the other sectors of the economy, from the industrial logistics sector. And I think on a kind of bigger scale, I think it's also worth noting that for a long time, national policy was wholly focused on housing delivery. And so the national planning policy climate that we were working in was overlooking economic growth. The current government growth is their top priority, but clearly policy at strategic and local level is still catching up, and as is what's happening in the market. Thank you.
Thank you, Assembly. It's a pleasure to be here. Echo everything that's been said thus far, but just to run through first challenges and then move to opportunities. Productivity growth in the capital continues to be our kind of biggest weakness. We were, one of the most productive cities in the world during the 1990s and 2000s. We've seen productivity growth really kind of lag in the last few years, and that is linked to our continued reliance on the kind of highly specialised service industry which we've cultivated in the CAS. Very, very good thing, continues to be a strength, but as those sectors have grown weaker in terms of productivity growth over the last 14 years, particularly since the financial crisis, the overall kind of outlook for the city in terms of economic growth has also suffered. Link that to the skills agenda. So on the one hand, we have sort of quite high rates of economic inactivity, inequalities in labour market engagement, so not getting the best out of Londoners, and also in the kind of outcomes and the proceeds of growth and how they're distributed across citizens. And on the other hand, on the kind of what that means for the business side, for the supply side, skills deficits in key sectors. We're seeing sort of lack in particularly construction, which obviously is very, very salient to conversation about the London plan. I want to pick up on that point about the trade-offs between use of employment land versus residential, that kind of overwhelming and correct political focus on delivering the homes we need nationally, but also in London does raise some pretty tricky questions for the city. That kind of loss of industrial land, which has been really good to see recognised in towards the new London plan. Our planning constraints, those tensions between our kind of, really great strategic kind of regional approach to planning policy and tensions with the hyper-local. We've seen those in particularly high-profile cases in our nighttime economy, that tension between what we want for the city and what works at the local level. Briefly also, lack of prime office space. Again, thinking about that competitiveness of those global sectors. We don't have that kind of prime A-grade office space in the centre that's as competitive as it used to be. Infrastructure constraints, particularly travel, orbital connectivity. I'm going to come on and talk a little bit about kind of unlocking the potential of our sub-regions, but that orbital connectivity is holding us back in terms of agglomeration effects outside of the CAS. Energy and connectivity, low rates of connection to the national grid, particularly in West London, and sort of buffers on broadband. When we think about the kind of economy that's coming down the future, we do need those kind of high-speed internet connections, etc. I'll pause just there and talk about one other challenge, which is our relative and comparative lack of devolved powers with regard to incentivizing local and regional economic growth in comparison to our international peers, particularly our limited ability to use fiscal levers to incentivize investment and growth, but also to have control over the distribution of the proceeds of growth, whether that is our ability to retain and allocate business rates or more kind of, one might say, radical looks at how we might be able to incentivize business activity and then be able to reinvest it in the pockets of Londoners. Again, we're quite far behind nationally. And just briefly on opportunities, London Growth Plan, I think, says it all, particularly in terms of our global sectors, our creative sectors, our service industry. We've got world-beating insurance, that kind of thing. But the potential of our sub-regions continues to be underlooked. Great to see some stuff in the Towards a New London Plan about enabling more kind of freedom and control across the city in terms of tailoring economic clusters, creating those kind of interdependent economic clusters across the city rather than the kind of monocentric model that we're living with at the moment, and kind of tailoring our sort of almost regional industrial strategy to the strengths and diversity of the local and regional economies that we have across the city.
Thank you all very much for those really comprehensive answers. Sarah, you mentioned the central activity zone in your answer, so I'd just like to ask you and Rob, what is your view on the boundaries of the central activity zone, and do you think it potentially should be expanded?
I'm not sure it should be expanded. It should be reviewed, definitely. It's been, I believe it's been the same boundary since the London Plan was conceived. No, Lisa's shaking her head. It has expanded to the Northern Isle of Dogs, but I think the main central activity zone in Westminster and City has been similar for a long time and should be reviewed. It's very difficult in terms of, is it just about boundary or is it about the uses that go into that central activity zone? In its peers elsewhere in Europe, London has a lot less residents than other cities, but it's a very fine balance and will require very careful policy drafting, because we wouldn't want to, at the same time, if we were to encourage more residents into the centre, which I think would make sense policy-wise, we don't want to undermine the commercial heart of the city and the contribution that makes to the economy.
Yep.
I was a little confused. You started off saying that you didn't think the central activity zone needed to be expanded, but it does need to be reviewed. So reviewed within its current boundaries.
So I said I didn't know if it should be expanded. I think the boundary just needs to be looked at again, especially in relation to the kind of secondary and tertiary office locations, possibly, where maybe there's vacant space that could be repurposed. But it needs a very sophisticated review, because what we don't want to be doing is undermining the prime office locations and where demand is still really strong.
Rob, did you have any thoughts on that question?
To
build on Sarah's point. I don't think it's necessarily about reviewing the sort of boundaries of the CAS. It's about both its functions as a kind of an entity and can it lean into our strengths. So I would just say actually our assessment of what's in towards the London plan for the CAS is actually relatively unambitious at this point, and I'm not saying that's necessarily a bad thing. The CAS has done very good things for the city over the kind of 15, 20 years that it's been in place. Protections and sort of a greater look at the balance between residents' needs and the strengths of the CAS. So, for example, our visitor economy, all welcome, but that's all going to frankly play out in terms of how the sort of strategic planning role of the GLA is going to interact with boroughs and in sort of that hyper-local circumstance. So I think it's going to be a wait and see on whether kind of these proposed changes to the role of the CAS actually have the bite that we want in terms of greater desirability for the visitor economy. I did have another point. In our work for the West London Alliance and for London Borough of Ealing, we were very clear in that conversation where we were talking about unlocking a second engine of growth for the capital in the West, but that wasn't about displacing or replacing or replicating the CAS. This is about complementarity of different sectors, totally different economic needs and profile and opportunity and how it interacts with the CAS. It's not about kind of CASifying, as you would say, the entire city. It's about recognizing that we have an extremely diverse regional economy and that there are planning tools that could be put in place to unlock that, rather than necessarily saying, let's do more CAS in more of the city.
Thank you both very much. Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Good morning to you all. I'm going to start with Rob, probably on this. Excuse me. How can the London plan better support economic development across London's opportunity areas and town centres?
Very happy to take that question. So I think that one of the key sort of positive things that we see in the kind of draft, well, the outline consultation as it is that more coordinated and flexible approach to managing industrial land, so reversing that decline in industrial land that we've seen over the last 20 years. That flexible recognition of clusters that I referred to earlier, we would say that it doesn't mean we're going in the direction of kind of we're going to build a polycentric city, but it does mean we're going to be able to support more organic economic activity in kind of niche industries, you know, sort of whether it's a tech city in the east or heritage on the Portobello Road, screen industries in Acton. It does seem that the policy direction does seem to be enabling that sort of outside of the centre. That greater flexibility for commercial development in town centres, easier conversion and retrofit, all going to make sites more viable.
Can I just ask you, I'm cynical of policy reviews and all the rest of that because they have lots of fluffy, flowery words. What change will be made? Imagine I wanted to set up some, I don't know, business that puts out those digital art things. Is this going to make it easier? Am I going to be able to find a site because I have a particular type of business? Is someone going to? Can I ring someone to ask what I do next? How does it actually make day-to-day growth of our economy different?
So that's where I think this greater flexibility about the purposes of existing sites or kind of the opportunity areas in different parts of the city will come to the fore. Ideally, it will make it easier for if you are a borough and you've got a high street that's not doing so well, but you have the green shoots, there will be greater flexibility within the London plan to be able to convert or change sites in order to respond to the kind of, say, emerging business dynamics in your local area. And that's one of the things I think will be different.
I'll come to Sarah with the same question, but ask and sort of add an additional thing to that is how, because I believe that culture trumps the rules every single time. You can change the rules as much as you like, but if you don't change the culture, you'll get nowhere. How does this London plan seek to address that underlying belief, if you share it with me, you know, because we have a direction of travel. I would ask the question, for instance, who at council level is responsible for looking out to see what kind of businesses they may want to agglomerate in their area? Does that person exist? Does City Hall help with that? How is City Hall helping to drive the change in culture as well?
I think in terms of your first question, in terms of how can the London plan better support economic growth in opportunity areas, I think we're doing a lot of work on opportunity areas at the moment. We were really encouraged to see towards a new London plan consultation, the reference to reviewing opportunity areas. Do we still continue with the same approach? I think my view is that some of the early opportunity areas had a really bespoke opportunity area planning framework. It was very location specific, and I think as more and more came forward, they became more generic, and actually they provide a really good vehicle for creating the specialist clusters for the growth sectors that were identified in the London Growth Plan. So I think that is a tangible change that could be made. Your second question in terms of culture, I think those localised action plans and opportunity area planning frameworks provide a really good opportunity for local buy-in within each local authority. They're really great where there are cross-boundary issues, the opportunity area straddling a boundary. I think that then takes a strategic concept but kind of builds it from the ground up at a local level, and then hopefully helps address your culture issue and a mindset at local level.
Please do, Lisa and Celeste, if you feel you want to make a comment, please do. You've partially answered my next question, because it talks about should the plan be more explicit to support a more balanced spatial distribution, but you sounded like you said being generic and letting it happen a bit more locally is a better thing, or am I putting words in your mouth?
I think you need the strategic framework as to what is the purpose for an opportunity area. How many do we need? Should they be, of a really big scale? Should it be every regeneration kind of site of significant scale? It's for the London plan to set the purpose, but for each framework, I think, should have a more bespoke framework developed at a local level. That was the point I was making.
Okay, I throw this question to the whole panel. How can the next London plan support London's growth sectors? For instance, I've been speaking to a lot of young entrepreneurs. I happen to have photography as a hobby, and I've been taking pictures of them for free, so they, just lower their costs. But they're not even aware of these things. How are we getting these messages out? That's the first thing for the people who would build our economy in the real world. And secondly, how does this lower the cost? Because if you're setting up a business, if you run a business, you don't care about politics other than how does it lower the cost. So would you be able to display to any kind of sector how the existence of the London plan and these opportunity areas lowers their costs? Shall I start with Lisa? There you go.
That's great. Slightly to your previous questions as well that I think will be helpful. A couple of points. Just firstly, in terms of a review of the economic-related designations. So at the moment we have the central activity zone, we have town centres and we have industrial locations. But there's something missing from that, which in the past has been covered by our opportunity areas. But going forward, especially if we exit some of those opportunity areas because they've been complete or whatever reason, there's something slightly missing. So we are looking at a new economic designation for the London plan that will fill that gap. And these are spaces that are not really town centres. They're not industrial areas, and I think there's quite a number of those that we've identified, and I think that will certainly help. And even recently, during the consultation, I've had conversations with people who deal with archers, for example, like Places for London, but also Archco, for example. They're not currently very well provided for unless they're in an industrial designation, but it's clear that they do provide employment opportunities and spaces for businesses and entrepreneurship. So those kinds of things that might definitely help add another tier of economic growth, economic space, where the primary activity is economic. And also just in the document, we are looking at whether or not a wider range of affordable floor space should be brought forward. There are gaps in things like hospitality or food and beverage, and there are probably businesses in those sectors that may well benefit from affordable workspace and a much more wider provision of affordable workspace.
Do you think because the food and beverage situation, I think, is an obvious one to respond to, but London has to survive into the future. Do we think we could have more ambition? We should be talking about businesses that are yet formed. I'm going to hesitate to use the word AI, but lots of AI businesses needed a place to be. Could we be that place for them? And many other businesses I'm unaware of. But how will we? Do you feel like we have a big enough ambition to include future types of business?
I'll comment on that and then Celeste can add anything. But in planning, we can really only deal with use class orders, and we just have to be clear on that. So that's where the difference is going to be between the London Growth Plan and what that means in terms of planning policy, which primarily controls determining planning applications and the plan-making functions of both ourselves and also the local authorities. And so what it will be is very carefully crafted policies that bridge that gap, because they speak quite different languages. AI can take place in a range of workspaces, and the only thing planning can control is within the use class order. So probably those spaces exist. Whether or not the right businesses can access the workspaces they need, and that comes back to that question of the provision of affordable workspaces, start-up space, grow-on space, those kinds of spaces that we are securing. But in terms of the overall uses, each sector will quite likely be in competition with other occupiers who use the same types of floor space, or particularly in use class E.
So multiple types of business are caught up in your designations, and okay, I understand. Thank you, Celeste.
Yes, I guess to build on what Lisa said, it's ensuring there's that variety of space provided. I guess one of those emerging sectors has been the life sciences, and each life science sector kind of has different specialists and has merged out of the ground in different ways. Some have been led by institutions, like the one at King's Cross is more private sector led, but it's also then tying that in with the tertiary kind of education. So it's trying to create this ecosystem of space that can evolve over time. As planners, I don't think we can't predict the future, so it's ensuring that there is a variety of spaces in a variety of locations to support the evolution of these sectors and spaces. Okay. And then we are supported, or the boroughs are supported by their own economic development teams who are kind of a bit more on the ground, and they can inform the planning, the planners to understand what kind of space. I think there's a scheme in King's Cross where they approve some student accommodation with worker space at the ground floor to allow spin-outs. So it's just trying to understand where the market's going and providing that kind of space, but also the flexibility in that space.
So you feel the mechanism you have to build the London Plan has that intelligence arm that can say these are things that are maybe different, new, changing, that we need to take into account, when we write this plan, being it's going to have to last 5 years. I'm just going to circle back to the housing, because the London Plan has been, you could argue, pretty poor at providing housing. You've got places like Old Oak Common that is meant to provide loads and hasn't. What do you think needs to change to improve that performance?
I think firstly it's important to note that recent housing delivery has exceeded any previously in recent history, and certainly since the 1970s. So there was a ramping up of housing delivery in London, and then there were a number of things that affected it, and I think they've been well explored. For example, in the Housing Delivery Task Force and their findings in terms of the barriers, and I know this committee has also looked at those barriers for bringing forward housing delivery. I think in terms of the numbers going forward, as we've said, we will plan for 880,000 homes, and we will set out a plan as to where they will be met, and that will be allocated against the boroughs. We do intend to group up those housing targets. So, for example, a borough might receive its baseline housing target. It might receive housing targets that are associated with transport investment, for example. And that we recognise that we're unable to deliver those homes unless that transport investment is delivered. And again, there'll be housing numbers associated with Greenbelt and the development that will take place there, to make sure that what we don't have is boroughs offsetting their brownfield requirements on Greenbelt. They will bring them forward at the same time. And I think that will certainly help, having a plan going forward for where those homes are going to take place. We don't have a plan for those numbers of homes at the moment. But I would say there will have to be a host of other things, both within planning and outside of planning, to deliver those homes. And they're, we're doing further work on those. They're well documented. They include a simplified and streamlined London plan, more clarity about what you need to do to get planning permission, and perhaps more clarity about when a planning application has done enough to be approved, so that negotiations aren't open-ended. There's a point at which industry knows that they've met the policy criteria. We can stop negotiating on those things. There's a whole host of things that we'll look at, and also noting that we've been very clear and honest about viability concerns in this consultation, and also giving that commitment to, at this point, not increase the burden on development. I hope will provide reassurance both for the development industry, but also for those who hold the funding to have the confidence to invest in housing development in London.
Okay, that's good. That still sounds like quite a bit of change to me in the London planning, because planning in London has been emotional for many people to deliver lots of housing. Of course, some of what you said around the numbers that delivered, but we've also had records amount of investment in London, and you could argue with our targets lowered against that investment and still struggled. I just want to quickly talk about the economic future of London in planning terms. Are we looking down the road? And are we looking? You talked about Rob talked about industrial land and its scarcity in London. Are we looking at how we can answer this question technologically? Are we talking about densifying that? Are we talking about working with our partners slightly outside London who would arguably have more space than us? I'm looking at you, Celeste, maybe for an answer. What kind of work are we looking at? Because the competition between housing and industrial, at least politically, housing is winning at this point. And we'd have to accept that. But could we be doing more focused work to bring back that industrial base?
Yes, so as part of this London plan, we're doing like an economic evidence piece, which will look at all different use classes and what their current supply is, what the future demand is, and the balance between the two. But then also potential areas for, I guess, where new land can be found, for specifically industrial, but also within that sub-market, it's the difference between data centres, which are kind of long-term, they sign long-term leases, they're a secure tenant for the landowner, versus, I guess, the smaller industrial, and how, given rents, how that is also changing. So how the rent will affect whether someone will take a smaller unit but need to do more deliveries, or will they take a larger unit and do less rent. So we kind of need to think about all of those factors, and the rents in London versus outside London, where a business is likely to locate, where there's potential land. The Towards document clearly sets out that we will look at grey belt and green belt sites. Obviously, where's the best for that in terms of industrial land? And again, we'll re-look at co-location and intensification, but under current economic conditions, they're on stall at the moment. There's very few being delivered, except where you can get a lot of, I guess, cross-subsidy. So down in the Old Kent Road, there are a few schemes coming forward that have good design measures for the industrial elements, but they are supported by a lot of residential height above that, and you can't get that everywhere on industrial land in London.
Okay, and that just the additional pieces of the logistics. Certain businesses, maybe they could be located further away if the logistics was correct. When you speak to the Port of London Authority, they're desperate for us to use the river more. Is that possible?
Just one reflection on the sort of role of identification of specific sites and thinking about what might be used for is one of the shifts I think that's notable in the current Towards London plan is with those potentially revising the map of those opportunity areas. I think something that we've noticed at Centre for London is that it appears to be a degree of picking winners based on the likelihood of central government investment in some of our big ticket infrastructure projects. So, for example, that uncertainty around Crossrail 2 means some of the South London opportunity areas are the ones that are being looked at, maybe being changed or evolved, maybe they've delivered on their mission, but there's also appears to be a political calculus about are the rest of the conditions which are beyond the remit of the GLA and beyond the remit of councils, particularly around national investment in infrastructure, influencing how we are picking our winners in the city. So there are these contextual factors we need to think about. And then in terms of that thing about the relationship with the wider southeast, like really, really important. And again, it's that trade-off. Like, do we want to go back to the 1960s and having a kind of master plan for the southeast? I would say not. I think the London Plan model works quite well, but there is currently a sort of, I would say, a lack of whether it's formal spaces or governance structures for engagement between, say, the sub-regional partnerships and their kind of the growth corridors they're attached to. So you look at Local London in the east and its relationship to the innovation corridor running up to Cambridge. These ideas and discussions are going on with our borough leaders and with our industries, but the current kind of like formal planning structure for the city doesn't kind of create the most fruitful space for those kind of discussions about that cross-boundary.
Okay, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you. Assemblyman Boff?
Yes, you say you don't want to return to things like Serplan or whatever. To what degree should there be a liaison, therefore? Because what you've said in theory is good, but as far as I know, the Mayor hardly ever meets with Essex, Kent, Surrey, Hertfordshire, in order to discuss this.
I'd say at Centre London we don't have an answer for this yet, but it's on a sort of set of research questions that we want to look at over the next year because we think it's really, really important in the current moment for a kind of wider economic development, particularly in terms of how central government is structuring itself, even at the micro level. The London sort of team within MHCLG that was spanning with DBT has been disbanded and is now looking across the broader southeast as a structure. And as much as we don't want to be led by Whitehall in terms of how we organise ourselves, there is an opportunity for us to speak to the way that government appears to be thinking about kind of economic and industrial strategy in the southeast.
So do you think London should be bigger?
Oof, should we be bigger? Should we have Slough? I think I'll have to come back to you on that one. I would say I'm not sure.
Assemblymember Garbett?
Thank you, and hello, panel. I had a kind of zoom-out kind of question, I guess, and it links to the introduction of the Towards the New London Plan, which states London will need to identify, and then it talks about housing, but it also states how to achieve good growth. So I just wondered, within the context of this discussion and the rest of the London Plan, how that's being considered, like if there's still this commitment to good growth, because it feels like we might have drifted slightly from it. So I don't know, maybe Lisa or Celeste, if you want to come in on that.
Thank you. I'm really happy to pick that up. So the 6 good growth objectives that were set out in the current plan, we broadly plan to roll them over. I think they were the right things. They have worked well, and they're a good expression of what good growth means and what the overarching objective of the next plan is. Within that, though, I think that there's been a lot of water under the bridge since they were drafted. We've had COVID, there's been a lot of perhaps global uncertainty and particular changes to the economic situation. And all those may mean that some parts of them might need to be reprioritised, reframed, reordered. We now have the 2 overarching priorities of housing delivery and economic growth set out quite clearly in the London Growth Plan. So again, in order to fit in with that sounds right. Similarly, I think at the time that those good growth objectives were drafted, I'm not sure that resilience to respond to climate change and its impacts was quite as much at the forefront as it might be today. And I think since then, obviously there have been some quite considerable impacts that we need to think about, and certainly things like IPCC reports that have come through since then would suggest that there's much greater urgency to making sure that London is a resilient city alongside reductions in our emissions.
Thank you. Celeste, I don't know if you want to come in now or just add a little bit, because I think it is about who the growth is for, because I think that's, obviously we're talking about the London plan, but within the context of the growth plan, and I know there'll be some other scrutiny of that in other committees, but I think that's my point. We've spoken about growth sectors and, opportunity areas, but it's just how is that really going to be good growth in its, full including kind of climate, but also for, Londoners and people to address that inequality and be that inclusive economic development.
I think that's another point of ensuring the variety of space that's provided. So there's all different types of jobs provided on our high street. So it's trying to protect those. And I guess the one of the points earlier about how do we encourage our high streets to grow, to thrive, it's also bringing in that residential. So it kind of provides the customer base, the refocus on the high streets, and then supporting the jobs that are there, which are just not kind of big city jobs that perhaps is not for every Londoner. Same with industrial areas, they provide a great variety of jobs, and the affordable workspace policy as currently is, it's, a lot of that is determined by the boroughs. They understand their local economies and what kind of local social enterprises they have, and also all of those policies together do work to hopefully support local economies and the diversity of London.
And just, Lisa, when you were saying that the good growth, we're going to look at those points that were under good growth in the last plan. So is that being welcomed for feedback within this consultation then? Like, how do people kind of comment on, because you've just described some kind of thoughts that you've got, and I don't know where that's reflected in the consultation.
Yeah, absolutely. So we do specifically raise the good growth objectives and say that we broadly think they're right, but they obviously need to be reviewed just to make sure that they are right going forward. Can I just add something that, just on top of that, one of the things we are looking at particularly and have been for a long time is the lack of actual people within the built environment sector and how we bring more people into the built environment sector. There's a real cliff edge of retirement in a lot of the construction industry. Same goes with building regulation and building inspectors. Our own planning, we've been looking at how we diversify it and bring more people in and actual people to build. 1.5 million homes don't build themselves. So in that, one of the things you may have picked up is looking at a far more effective Section 106 arrangements for bringing skills into the sector so that there's a pooling arrangement across local authorities and across different schemes. Because at the moment what you can have is, for example, an apprentice will start their training, but the scheme finishes and that apprentice hasn't finished their training. Whereas if there was a brokerage scheme, you could allow that apprentice to continue their training for the full length needed across multiple sites around London, and that could be a real value that at a strategic level we could play.
Thank you. That's a very specific example. I guess my thoughts were just on that kind of trickle down, everyone's going to be £11,000 richer apparently according to the good growth, the growth plan, and I just think my challenge is around all these elements within the London plan and how they add up to that definition of good growth. But I'll pass it back to you, Chair, for more questions.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Thanks, Chair. Yes, so my question, I've got a couple of follow-ups that are on the area we're sort of talking about anyway, but I wanted to try and focus. They're for Lisa and Celeste, but if Sarah and Robbie have anything. And it's about inclusive economic development, but specifically around making sure it's geographically distributed through London, because obviously We have essential activity zone. We have, I can't remember, I didn't write down who said it, but somebody said, you know, we've got to follow the market a little bit in terms of growth sectors, which is great. Absolutely, if it's growing in certain areas, support it. But how do we make sure that, particularly, we're getting high quality and a variety of jobs across London, and particularly in outer London boroughs? What sort of policies will the London Plan be able to enact that would help that?
I guess, again, it's that diversity of jobs. I'm sure I heard, like, even in the life sciences sector, 60% of the jobs you don't need a degree for. So, but then it's getting that interim bit between, you know, when you finish your secondary school, how do you know about that sector, or how do you train for the basic skills to enter those sectors? And I think that's where we can work with our colleagues in the boroughs and other institutions to try and have an understanding of where the economy is going. Some of that's towards the London Growth Plan. Yeah. Some of that brokerage and looking at investing in people is all coming through that, and then through the London Plan we need to understand how we can also support that, whether it's through construction skills, or there's also Section 106 requirements for the people that work in particular buildings, whether they can do local jobs for local people, those kind of policies as well. Yeah. But I guess for us to put them in the plan, we do need that support from our partners, because planners alone can't do that element.
Sure. So it was actually more about where the jobs are located. So if you say life sciences, obviously that's growing. There are certain places that they're great, but if they're not accessible for people, so how do we ensure that not necessarily specifically life science, but that range of jobs is actually spread across London? So otherwise we will find that we're there was another comment, I think it was Rob sort of saying, you know, we can't just sort of, I didn't write down the quote, but it was very good, about, you know, how do we keep just not support where it's already happening, and how do we spread that out? Apologies if I've misquoted you, because I don't know.
I guess it's where we have other interventions that we're already doing in planning. So perhaps like the affordable workspace policy. Yes. At the moment, it is quite delegated to the boroughs, and you might just get a few desks in a large kind of scheme in central London. So it's whether or not the boroughs would be willing to perhaps pool that and use an empty building that they already have to create some kind of affordable workspace in various parts of their borough, and support various sectors in that part to support their local economies.
That makes sense then. So looking at a more strategic approach potentially. Okay. And added to that, how could the London Plan address where there are inequalities in terms of existing infrastructure and transport and economic investment that's already going to one places? How do we manage to address that so it just doesn't continue to go to the same places, particularly if we're not necessarily going to get big transport infrastructure everywhere at the same time, which of course I would love.
So in the past, it's the places that have experienced growth and have experienced investment through development, I think they've seen the greatest benefit. So it's trying to balance that with any potential displacement of people, and working with the local communities to understand what they need once that development's completed.
Okay. Thanks, Lisa.
I was going to say as well, I think that where there's the best public transport accessibility is the best locations for increasing densities. Mm-hmm. So there is still headroom in some of the locations where, although they've had the investment in public transport accessibility, they haven't seen the development come forward. So those areas that have the best investment will be the ones that need to take the lion's share of development and change over time. So I would flip it on its head rather. There are also, because...
Can I clarify, do you mean economic and industrial development as well as
across the board, but particularly...
Because that's specifically what we're interested in on this.
Yeah, and particularly the housing, but as you say, the employment. So those best served town centres, for example, what they can do. But I think there's a second thing that's just completely gone.
Sorry.
Right.
Shall I go to Rob and you might
Let's
come back
go
to you?
to
That's
Rob.
because I interrupted you. Apologies. That's my fault.
I think Lisa actually got to the point I was going to raise about there is still sort of headroom. For example, we look at the either end of the Elizabeth line. Sort of East London has some of the highest footfall in the country and sort of use of transport line, and the West, we've still got lots we could squeeze out of that investment, and that links into that kind of regional industrial strategy for the West. There's, in our recent research, we identified there's more residential garden space in West London than the entirety of the square footage of the CAS. So there is lots and lots of room for development, and that is where we might be able to unlock the benefits of that pre-existing infrastructure, because the other end of the coin, which is, I think it's quite natural for a forward-looking document like the London Plan to look at, which is like what might the West London Orbital unlock for us, what might the DLR extension unlock for us, but we will see what we get on Wednesday with regard to that, with regard to the spending review. But I think it's prudent to look at what can be done with the existing investments, so there's actually still quite a lot more room to grow. And just on that point around the spatial distribution of prosperity, I think, again, what our analysis was trying to get at is that we've had this almost sort of monocentric model since the 1990s, product of the Big Bang. There is so much potential in the sub-regions, and that it's not just kind of, we look at inequality in the city and it's grown after the last few years. That is not just a sort of household to household inequality. Those are geographic inequalities. It is the bifurcation of people reaping the benefits of those high productivity, high output jobs, often located in the city centre, commuting in and going out, and other lower productivity and often lower paid sectors kind of existing generally around our high streets. And, we look at a borough like Greenwich, large employment in the public sector, in anchor institutions, doing amazing work for the city and very important to it. But that role of planning to be able to give that flexibility to lean into where business dynamism is, which is what I think we are seeing towards the London Plan, could see less of that spatial inequality in terms of socioeconomic outcomes in the city.
Yeah, thanks. I think that's really interesting. I can think of lots of town centres in East London that could really benefit from a range of jobs that more local people could do. Sorry, Sarah.
Thank you. On the original point about inclusive economic development, we mentioned the London Plan and the Growth Plan, but I just wanted to flag the London Skills Improvement Plan, which is kind of that delivery vehicle for making sure that Londoners have the adequate skills and allows for that more inclusive economic distribution. The other point in terms of bringing these points together, you mentioned about how we can target new areas. That comes back to the point I made earlier about potentially having specialist clusters in the opportunity areas. And the affordable workspace has been mentioned a couple of times. And I just wanted to say a bit more on that, please, if I may. I've personally done a lot of research into this because the current London Plan has a new policy about introducing affordable workspace. And it very clearly talks about the need for delivery to be locally led and where there's identified demand. So both in terms of demand in a particular location, but also from particular sectors. So the policy is very clear in its expectations, but what's happened on the ground is that the boroughs have started to introduce very generic policies. So it tends to be that there's a borough-wide policy, and you end up with some kind of fairly bland, but probably very high-quality office space in a lovely, sparkly new office building, and it's not necessarily what's needed. Celeste made the point about, is it better to have contributions into a hub? And that would then tie in neatly with these specialist clusters that the Growth Plan is trying to establish and promote, and would be a much better use for developer contributions and more effective. There are very successful hubs like this in locations like Lambeth, for instance, where the local authority has taken developer contributions, and that comes back to Lord Bailey's point earlier as well about the cost for startups. These are really, really great facilities to foster startups and where they can benefit from each other, create their own little ecosystem, and then be able to move on to other space.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much. Back to you, Chair.
Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Anderson, does residential garden space have value?
Absolutely, but the question of the kind of fundamental question of planning policy is how do we put the available land to its best use in the interests of citizens, residents, businesses, public sector. And it was more just raising the question of London's very big, and we could potentially be doing more with the land that we have.
So gardens are not a good use?
I one day hope to own a garden, and I think maybe
and when you do, you'll probably think
I'd rather
it's
like
quite
this.
useful.
Absolutely.
So do you accept that gardens are useful?
I think this was yes, and what this was it was just a notable sort of little data point that popped up in our comparative analysis of the West London sub-region to the CAS, and raising the question of that sort of ongoing intensification in the CAS to drive economic growth, not just for the city, but also for the country, maybe does have limits. So we can take a slightly finer look at what the opportunities are in the rest of the city, which is where I think the proposals in towards London Plan, for example, around specialisation, flexibility around clusters, easing up some of the consideration around conversions, look promising. But this is not a proposal to start tearing up every garden in West London.
Did sound like it, but never mind.
Assembly Member Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I think, Rob, in your introduction, you mentioned about energy connectivity and sort of issues around that. So I'd like to ask sort of a bit more about that. And obviously, we've seen fairly recently the issues with Heathrow and also with parts of the Elizabeth, Jubilee, Northern and Bakerloo lines were out of service because of power supply issues. So keen to understand a bit more thoughts on that, starting with you, Rob, if anyone else would like to add as well. Are we confident that London has the infrastructure in place or can have sufficient energy infrastructure in place? And the more we're relying on renewables that are perhaps less reliable, how's that going to be an issue in keeping the lights on and keeping energy supplies to these industrial uses and resi as well?
Thank you, Assembly Member. I mean, on capacity of the grid, it's sort of there's reasonably strong evidence about the limitations of grid connectivity in West London. It is a blocker both a lot of the focus has been on residential and being able to power the new homes being built, but also this has big considerations for employment uses. So particularly, references to use of some of that land space or brownfield for data centres, and incredibly energy hungry, and the grid is a little way away from being able to service those needs at the moment. And I know the GLA is doing some really good work in terms of working with central government on how we can get that moving, but it doesn't seem to be hugely up the priority list when these are very, very large infrastructure projects that would be needed. So it's one thing that we wanted to pick out in terms of a second order but important question about the viability of some of the potential future uses of these sites. Sorry, remind me of the second half of your question.
But if we're shifting from one source of energy to others, renewables possibly less reliable, but just the general overall capacity, have we got that? And how, if we haven't, what do we need to do in order to get additional capacity and the connectivity and the infrastructure in place so that we can support both residential and the industrial growth as well?
I think the main consideration now is just connectivity, let alone capacity. And there's going to be interesting. It's going to see what's going to come out of the government's consultations on pricing, on zonal pricing, which could see costs of energy go up quite considerably for London and the South East. So it's another kind of big, important moving part for the city in the wider sort of energy policy conversation. So I think we should watch that quite closely.
Prices aren't high enough already, are they?
Oh, yeah.
Does anyone else on the panel have anything to sort of add to that?
Sorry, could I just make the point that I think there is a big issue coming with regards to water supply management and flood risk management. This isn't just an energy issue. I think, as was identified in the London Climate Resilience Review.
Who needs to act on these things, and how do we make this happen? and draw it to the right attention of the right people?
I think what's needed is partnerships. I'm not an expert in this area. To be honest, I just wanted to flag it as an area that it's imperative to resolve for the level of growth that the London Plan is needing to deliver.
Thanks. I'm conscious of time, and I know that the next question is quite a juicy one, so I'll finish there if that's okay.
Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
Just a very short question. Is anybody asking for a reservoir or water supply to London? Does that feature anywhere in our GLA goings on?
There are discussions around water supply with our colleagues, particularly in the infrastructure team. But for example, there's the proposal that's been put forward by Thames Water with respect to the pipeline between Teddington and East London as a mechanism. Whether that's the right mechanism, but obviously it would have to be done alongside Thames Water is currently in place because they would be the organisation that would be putting in the infrastructure, and that's their current proposal, which is the pipeline between between Teddington and to extract water during times of drought and to replace it with treated sewage from Isleworth. From
Thames Water on a naughty step, they're not the most reliable bunch. But I mean, are we just, because is that taking water from an existing supply, or are we trying to get a new supply? There's a lot of people in London. I think somebody should be asking for new water. Is that going on?
Those conversations are happening, but obviously Thames Water is the statutory body that we have to have those conversations with, and the only thing they're currently putting on the table is the extraction of water at Teddington from the Thames itself. So that's the water supply. Yeah.
Thank you for that. Thank you.
Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you, Chair. So I'm going to return. We've touched upon it already, which is industrial sites on greenbelt land. So I'm going to wrap all my questions up into one big question, which is why is the London Plan consultation considering identifying sites in the greenbelt? What will the process be to identify those sites, and how will the process, what checks and balances will there be in the process to ensure that any sites that are identified are genuinely appropriate? Sorry, those are obviously to Lisa and Celeste, but then if anyone wants to say anything, obviously open it up.
So we're well underway with the London-wide Greenbelt review, and that will review all parcels of London's Greenbelt in its entirety to understand its performance against those national policy purposes, including whether it's previously developed land. We're conscious that not all locations in the Greenbelt are necessarily suitable for residential, and some would be very suitable for industrial, and particularly the kinds of industrial that perhaps are less well suited for for a London location within the existing urban context. They might be more land hungry and need large sites. They may be poor neighbour uses, but importantly as well, there are some locations across London's existing greenbelt that would provide a poor residential environment. So, for example, alongside key motorways, that's not really a place we want to be putting housing. So we will be looking at the greenbelt in its entirety, and we will be using the greenbelt to meet the shortfall in development capacity within London's existing urban extent, and that's not just in relation to housing, it's also in relation to business uses. So there may be opportunities to bring forward industrial activities, very much of the sort you already see outside of the M25, but within close proximity to London, and bring forward those kinds of uses, particularly making best use of sites that may not be appropriate, but also wouldn't really bring forward big numbers. They may not have, for example, the transport infrastructure you'd want to see for an appreciable urban extension. So there may be opportunities there. We're still exploring them. And The other point that, and I can hand over to Celeste for more detail on this, but the other crucial point is we did want to manage London's industrial capacity in the last London plan at a strategic level. We still hold that that's the best level, because then you can, if every borough doesn't have to wash its own face, you can take the best industrial sites, you can make good use of those, and then you can potentially release other sites for residential. And then if you do that, one part of that picture has to be those greenbelt sites, recognising there will be greenbelt release for residential, but also perhaps for other development needs, and how we balance that across the board, both between within the existing urban extent and outside, but also between residential and other business development needs. And we're still undertaking that work, so we won't know the answers to that. They'll be ready for the next draft plan.
So I guess just to give some context, we've been losing our industrial land for the last 20 years while London's been growing, the economy's been growing, as well as the population. And we need that land to service Londoners, like roofers, scaffolders, all need to store their materials. Builders in the CAS, they need laundry service, all those kind of things still need to occur in London. I guess there's other questionable, in terms of diverse economy, I'm sure we'd love some manufacturing, but does that really need to happen in London? And I think that's the greatest sector that's been leaving, probably answering that question in terms of costs. So in terms of looking at existing stock, the current plan looks at co-location, intensification, kind of trying to stack. But whilst trying to release, I guess if we're looking across London in terms of the best use of land in general, releasing some of those more accessible sites for residential, and then trying to kind of intensify the rest of the strategic industrial land or the industrial land. I guess some of the issues around that are land fragmentation. So it's lots of different owners all wanting to do their own thing, leases coming up at different times, which has made that hard. There's quite a few kind of master plans for strategic industrial land, but bringing those forward is very slow. Current economic conditions, in some areas, the value for industrial land is higher than residential, so you don't have that cross-subsidy of trying to kind of intensify a piece of land and put housing on the rest of it, so it just stays as it is, not intensified. And then, I guess, in terms of viability now, the stacking at the moment, the viability doesn't work out. So I guess we need to think about, how we want London serviced, whether we want it serviced, and the addition of new uses that are coming forward on industrial land. So data centres, the new National Planning Policy Framework asks boroughs to plan for data centres. Otherwise, we've seen where they're approved in the green belt, kind of, perhaps slightly, locations that we might not think are best anyway. So I guess bringing Greenbelt into it more strategically and logically will hopefully help that process.
Thank you. Sarah and Rob, did you have anything to add to that?
The last London Plan review marked a real step change in the strategic protection of industrial capacity. The problem is that preserving the historic status quo means that industrial land isn't necessarily located in the best location, be it for surrounding communities, be it for access to the highway network. And during the last examination, we made the case for land swaps, but at that point we didn't have the concept of grey belt. And this does give us a really good opportunity to just take a step back and ask, of course you can't kind of move everything around, but there are some key locations, and there are boroughs like Enfield that have looked at this and said this isn't, our industrial capacity isn't in the best location. And those sites which are next to motorways, like Lisa mentioned, provide a really good opportunity for new industrial land to then release land in other locations with better access to public transport and community facilities to then be allocated for housing. And as logistics vehicles become more electrified, access to the highway network, it's less of a sustainability issue and much more practical.
Thank you.
We have a few supplementaries. I just ask Assembly members to be brief as we are a bit pressed for time. Assembly Member Garbett.
Okay, I had a couple of quick questions. So I'm going to do them really quickly. When will we see the output of the Greenbelt review that you mentioned, Lisa? Because I know you said it's well underway, so it'd be good to know when Assembly members will see it. And linked to that, I feel like the description of the industrial use kind of really stretches the definition of grey belt. So I just wondered how that fits with the definition of grey belt. And I did have a question about inclusive economies, but maybe I'll ask for a written on that if I send it, and we can send it to people for a comment on that bit. Thank you.
In terms of the Greenbelt review, we haven't taken a decision because it will depend when it's ready. But also noting that there are a number of boroughs who are a party to the Greenbelt review, and they may have needs or timings that are different from our own. And they'll get their own bespoke report as part of the overall piece. So it may depend on the borough, but ultimately it will certainly be published alongside the draft London plan.
Yeah, because that was my other question, how it links with the consultation, and how you're really listening to residents within that, because I feel like obviously that conversation's happening between boroughs and the GLA, but not kind of listening to kind of community groups and residents, so just making sure their voices are in that review.
Yeah, the review itself it's not a review of, well, there's two elements. So first of all, the London-wide Greenbelt review doesn't say the boundaries should be here or this bit should be released or anything like that. It's a technical review of the degree to which a parcel does or does not meet the purposes set out nationally. It's undertaken independently to us, and as they review the whole of the Greenbelt, recognising it's a significant exercise, they will moderate back against earlier parcels to make sure that they're being absolutely consistent. So it doesn't matter where a parcel is, it will be the findings of the assessment would be the same whether or not it's a site in Bromley or Enfield or whatever. And we think that's crucial. There's got to be a sense of fairness in the production of the Greenbelt review, so that all of those parcels, there's an assessment. From the assessment, there will be decisions taken about how we apportion the housing targets for London boroughs. And again, that will be completely blind to which planning authority it is. That will be based on looking at where the best opportunities are for bringing forward development, where those parcels are that are grey belt, how those parcels, what the intelligence tells us from the Greenbelt review. So again, that's an important element that again must be seen to be fair across all of the authorities in London, and how we arrive at what those housing figures are. And those housing figures will include figures for Greenbelt that will be kept separate from the brownfield supply.
Did you have a comment on the grey belt definition and the use of industrial land within that?
I think just the MPPF is very clear that any shortfall in meeting needs, irrespective of whether it's housing or business needs, need to be made up by using the green belt and looking at grey belt first. So national policy is very clear on that. It doesn't in any way say that grey belt is an appropriate location for other types of floor space than housing, i.e. industrial floor space.
I know we're coming on to Greenbelt later, and I know there's some other strong views on the committee about our concerns about whether this is the best way to address some of the crises. But yeah, back to you, Chair. Thank you.
Assemblymember Boff.
Ms. Giusti, when did it become a surprise that it was complex to develop industrial land in London?
I think so there was a big push for logistics during the pandemic, and so that kind of altered a lot of the land values. So it became more difficult to try and cross-subsidise the residential with the industrial.
So it's a land value issue?
Yes.
Thank you. And Ms. Fairmainer, would the London plan allow boroughs to redesignate Sill as housing land?
I think that's the intention at the moment, that where something's identified as a strategically important industrial location, that it should be retained, particularly for those B2 and B8 uses that are poor neighbours. So it would be expected that they're not the right locations for putting residential, and we would use the kind of overarching process. If there was a site that should be used for residential, then it shouldn't be being designated as a strategic industrial site.
So Barking and Dagenham removing 7.6 hectares from strategic industrial land in order to allocate it to housing. What's your view of that?
That would all need to be addressed in the new strategic location. So the only land that should be designated at that strategic level, as I noted, for those bad neighbour uses, should be the ones that isn't intended to have residential in going forward. And I think there could well be other mixed-use sites where there can be a blend of uses, but for those strategic sites going forward, those particular ones that are identified for B2 and B8 uses that don't sit comfortably with residential, they shouldn't include ones that there's an intention to include residential going forward.
I mean, Barking and Dagenham particularly seems to be having a field day on strategic industrial land. It's not only putting some over to housing, it's also relegating strategic industrial land down to local strategic industrial land. You're sympathetic to that?
I think, you'll correct me if I'm wrong, but Barking and Dagenham were one of the boroughs identified as a release borough back when we were able to manage it strategically. So there has been an assumption they would release some industrial at some point.
So when... I'll pursue it another way. Thank you.
Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
Just a quick question. You talked about, Celeste, you talked about one of the difficulties being the patchwork of landowners and the like, and land assembly being an issue. But does that mean the use of CPO powers? Or you know, how do you assemble those land? Because if you're going to ask people to wait, you're going to need some very generous-minded landowners to sort of hang around.
The use of CPO is definitely not my expertise, but through the master plan process, the boroughs have been working with the landowners and have, I guess, tried to review the areas where most of the landowners are willing to kind of progress their land. So either consolidate one area and release parts of it for residential, but especially around transport nodes. So Black Horse Lane is one of the examples where Waltham Forest have done a master plan that we've accepted, and that's around the station. So a lot of it's already been released around the station for residential, and there's strategic industrial land to the rear that they've kind of got one landowner who owns a large proportion of the site that's going to intensify some, so do stacked industrial and release other parts of that land. Sorry, can you remind me of the question?
No, I'm just wondering about land assembly, because the scenario you just given makes financial sense, that landowners thought, I can realise some of the value of this land, but I wonder if it will be the same across everywhere, because to ask people to hold on to parcels of land can be tough, but if they can see an uplift coming in the future, maybe a council could negotiate around that.
Yes. Oh, sorry. So CPO process, it's not my area of expertise, but I understand it's costly to the borough because they have to do all the legal process.
Yes, that's correct.
And there's just no funding for that at the moment.
Yeah, and it's never received well, CPO. Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Assemblymember Baker.
Thanks, and this is the last question. I think we're already over time, but obviously want to hear your views on it. So just to Rob and Sarah, are there any barriers to London's economic growth which are not addressed in the consultation document, and what policies would you like to see implemented to resolve these challenges? You can. I'll I don't know, I'll sing a little song while you're... Sorry, it's a bit of a left turn.
I think the big one is that, you know, one of the largest barriers to growth in the city is our housing crisis. It's the fact that it's become an incredibly expensive place to live. There's lots of incentive to not sell your home. We've seen redistribution of floor space from the social and rented sectors over to owner occupation. And a lot of the sort of planning proposals that seem to be coming through towards the new plan do seem to be sensible and will help us move out that delivery of new supply. And we at the Centre of London have been calling for some strategic release of greenbelt land for some time. Where I think that there is a gap is particularly the role of the rented sector, houses 3 million Londoners, and also the kind of how do we kind of plan for the multiple demographic housing needs that the city has. There is a kind of embedded assumption at the moment that if you're going to build something for residential, it should be a single family home. And London is a lot more than that. And kind of we're looking towards that kind of greater prosperity, sort of getting rid of that drag on our productivity growth that the housing crisis is causing, a slightly more nuanced look at across tenures and across sectors of what the kind of housing supply needs of the city are broadly, without that necessarily just being conflated with a conversation about where can we build new. And I think that's something that we notice hasn't featured terribly heavily in the document that's been published to date.
Thanks. Sarah, did you have anything to add?
Just 2 points to add. One being that the skills and workforce available across London is not wholly aligned with the direction of the economy and growth sectors and so on. Hopefully the growth plan and the London Skills Improvement Plan have got the foundations there to address that, but that's the kind of, the recent history where we are. And also the planning process is a barrier to economic growth. The resource within the boroughs makes planning very slow, sadly, and that's being addressed, but it's that's going to take time. That were the 2 main points.
Well, train loads of people up to do planners, and that wraps both of those answers up together, doesn't it? Back to you, Chair.
Thank you very much. That ends the first part of our discussion, so I'd like to say a big thank you to our guests for their responses. We'll now take a short adjournment for 5 minutes. Thank you. Welcome back to today's Planning and Regeneration Committee meeting, where we will continue our discussion on the London Plan consultation. Joining us in the chamber for this second panel are Ergen Erbel, Leader of the Council at Enfield, Jules Pipe, CBE, Deputy Mayor for Planning, Regeneration and the Fire Service, Alice Roberts, Head of Campaigns at CPRE, James Stevens, Director for Cities at the Home Builders Federation, and Ben Twomey, Chief Executive of Generation Rent. I will ask the first question in this discussion, and it is to you all. Can you please give us your thoughts on the potential changes regarding the Greenbelt and Metropolitan Open Land as set out in the Towards a New London Plan consultation document? That will start with Ben and Gercross.
Thank you, Chair. We really welcome the ambition in the London Plan. I think it has to be ambitious, with 88,000 new homes being built every year for the next 10 years as the target that the government's setting. To do that, we think it's really important that there is some strategic release of the Greenbelt land. I'm sure we'll get into the full discussion, but there's a number of ways in which people have talked about how pretty that land might be, and that's not always the case. But what's really not pretty in this city is how many children are living in temporary accommodation right now. We're talking about 90,000 children growing up, waking up today, not knowing where they're going to be by tonight. So it's a major problem we have, particularly in terms of renters who face serious insecurity, not just through evictions, which the government's pushing ahead a law to change, but also from the cost of renting. That's the number one problem that renters face at the moment, in their own words. And addressing that cost of renting needs a number of solutions, but one of them should be building homes where people want to live, particularly affordable homes, but even more so social homes as well, potentially to escape the trap of renting if we can't afford to be in the private rented sector.
Thank you very much. I don't think London has the option any longer to deliver the housing requirement it needs solely through the process of the redevelopment of brownfield land, which has been the policy approach which has informed a lot of planning policy for really the last 3 decades, certainly since New Labour's time, that towards an urban renaissance approach promoted by Richard Rogers, and has informed certainly the last 4 versions of the London Plan, but that's exhausted now. Even looking at the new housing requirement, the mandatory housing requirement under the new standard method of 88,000 dwellings a year, which London will have to accommodate, it's been failing to meet previous London Plan requirements, including objective assessments of needs, going back to the further alterations of the London Plan, when then it was carrying a deficit of about 20,000 homes. That's just the difference between need, objectively assessed need, and capacity. And in the current London Plan, it's short of 14,000 dwellings a year. I'm not talking about what London's actually managing to deliver. I'm talking about the difference between the assessment of need, the bedrock of which is that the household projections, and what is feasible to deliver on brownfield land within London. And I think that's really been exhausted. And I think the discussion document towards a London Plan throws that into sharp relief. I mean, looking at brownfield capacity, even with quite optimistic assumptions, the Mayor of London has concluded that he might be able to deliver something like 40,000 dwellings a year. But there's a big difference between that and the amount of land you would need to find from somewhere else to meet the a requirement of 88,000 homes a year. So I think you've got no other option other than to undertake a strategic review of the Greenbelt to signal to the London boroughs where they might need to be allocating land. And I think that's critically necessary. As sorry, I've forgotten your name, Ben. As Ben said, the extent of the housing crisis in London now is really palpable. He quoted the figure of 90,000 children effectively homeless. And London boroughs are spending, £4 million a day, according to London councils, just on temporary accommodation. So there are major social costs associated with not undertaking a Greenbelt review, but also major social benefits and economic benefits derived from actually undertaking that Greenbelt review, including the ability to secure more affordable housing on Greenbelt land.
Alice?
Thank you. So, as you might expect, we would not support release of Greenbelt land, although I think that it's fair to say that that some of the provisos around the proposals do make sense to us. But I think we have to look much more closely at why we're doing this. So 88,000 a year over 10 years, that's way more than we're ever going to build. So let's be honest, if we're building at 40,000, why are we releasing land for 88,000? And I think the dishonesty of this is to present it as a house building target. What it is a device to release land. And if we're building land at 40,000 a year, ambitious, then how are we ever going to use the land allocated for 88,000 a year? So, leaving that aside for the moment, the idea that we don't have enough brownfield land, so we have planning permissions for 300,000 homes already permitted. London boroughs are permitting at roughly 50,000 a year. That's without Greenbelt. So I would question that as well, and I would say that there's, we need some honesty around that as well. But leaving all that aside, what really, really worries us about this is that the idea that you can build your way out of a housing crisis. Building homes does not deal with affordability. Yes, if we can get the money in to build affordable, then great, but let's do that with the homes that are already planned and on the brownfield land at the rate that we can. But more than that, if London, and indeed the UK, does not come up with a housing strategy which actually deals with the cost of housing, then I can pretty much guarantee that in 5 or 10 years we are still going to be spending that vast amount of money on temporary accommodation, and those 1 in 20 children will still be in a temporary accommodation, and it will probably be more. And I'm somewhat astonished that I'm still being asked or presented as the person who is going to speak for the environment versus housing. I am never going to speak as somebody who wants people to remain in temporary accommodation. I'm speaking as somebody who wants to solve the housing crisis, as well as somebody who believes very strongly that the Greenbelt is extremely important to London for agriculture, for surface water management, for wetland suds to filter water from our polluted rivers, for biodiversity habitat, and indeed for sports and recreation. And indeed, if we want to talk about metropolitan open land, then golf courses, which are mentioned and not in a positive way, as if to say, why do we need all these golf courses? Well, one afternoon we looked at the golf courses in London, and every single one of them virtually that we looked at had some kind of SINC or SSSI status. So I feel that it's also dishonest to talk about the golf belt or golf courses as if they have no biodiversity and that they have no value in terms of all the things that we need. So if we think that there's if we think that there's too many golf courses in London, then go to the sports authorities and start to talk to them. And maybe we could have a sports strategy for London which talks about the need for London to be the greatest sport place in the UK for recreational sports, and actually have a sports strategy that underpins the London plan, and that talks about what sports might be accommodated on those golf courses if we have too much golf. Thank you.
Jules?
Thank you, Chair. As you know, the London Plan is a long and complex document that seeks to achieve many, many different things. And some of the things that it will be trying to achieve, such as affordability, will be part of the considerations going forward as we develop policy in the London Plan. But the issue about Greenbelt is really driven by just one simple question rather than all the interrelated ones. And that's an exam question has been set by the government to us that is simply identify the land within London's boundary that can accommodate 880,000 homes. That is the exam question, and that is what we are seeking to do with the land for London, call for sites, and the SHLA. With the best will in the world, I don't see how 880,000 homes can be accommodated within London's built form at the moment. So therefore, it does raise the question about where they go. And the Mayor, in the announcement of the Towards London Plan document, posited the idea that we would need to build on the Greenbelt to fulfil that 880,000 requirement. I think we can argue and discuss for weeks, if anyone wanted to, whether it's 580, 680, 880, 980 as it was under the previous government, although we can discuss whether it was really 980 or 730 another time. But at some point, whether it's the 10-year horizon of the document and the 10-year supply that we're being asked to identify, or whether that's built over 15 or 20, I would say it's a very useful exercise, whatever the number is, but let's just pick the number and stick with it for a while and actually look at where that would go and have an honest conversation about land use. Because I have, not necessarily naming people, I've heard people, the same people, rule out tower blocks. I've heard them rule out building on Greenbelt. I've heard them rule out backland sites as garden grabbing. And yet they're the same people who say we should be building family homes with gardens. I don't know where these family homes with gardens are going when they're ruled out. And now I think they're ruling out industrial land, so it's even more entertaining now where these homes are actually going to go. So I think it's actually an honest conversation, and that we shouldn't get hung up for the time being on the precise number and the timescale, because there will come a time when we will have had to have built 880,000 homes, and it would be, and actually, I think if we say, oh, actually, we won't be building anywhere near that for a time being, let's just ignore the question, I think people would, it would be fair to say that we were sticking our head in the sand and not taking a long-term view. So that's why I think we should be discussing this. And as I say, it doesn't presuppose any particular amount or location. It's about the principle and how much, ultimately. And then it will go in tandem, as you will have heard earlier, with the Greenbelt Review, which again does not identify particular land for release, but it just identifies how well a particular, all the Greenbelt within the London boundary is performing against the Greenbelt purposes. And then we can bring all that information together and then have a debate about the housing number and the locations when we create the next London plan. But even then, the actual locations for release are much further down the line that will be taken by local boroughs, and and those decisions will be taken at local borough level when they bring forward their local plans in the context of the overarching London plan and the 880 figure.
Thank you, Chair. My name's Councillor Edgar Edibla. I'm leader of the council. This issue is deeply personal to me, Chair. I rent a two-bed flat in a concrete jungle, and I have two very small children. This shouldn't be the case for someone who works full-time. It should be easier for people my age to be able to buy a property and get onto the property ladder. But we find ourselves in a housing crisis, and as council leader, I find myself having to support over 500 families who present as homeless to my council every month. 500 homeless families every month. When I became a councillor 8 years ago, we didn't even have half that. In Enfield, we're already having this conversation. Our new local plan is nearly complete. After 14 years of failure and mismanagement by the previous government, we finally have a government on our side who are saying we need homes to both rebuild the economy and build the family-sized homes, the affordable ones, that people like me need. We're delivering what you could call a new town in London, Meridian Water, 2,000 homes, 300 homes built last year, 300 homes going to be built this year, 800 homes to be built next year, and that's on industrial land, that's on brownfield, and even that's not enough. We need to cut through the red tape, and it's not just the red tape, we also need to have a serious conversation about what we consider green belt. I'd love to invite you, Chair, and everyone else, including my lovely members on this panel, to Enfield one day, to the 7 golf courses we have in Enfield. And instead of playing Where's Wally, we'll play Where's the Wildflower Meadow? Because, Chair, I'm a beekeeper. I've got 4 generations of beekeeping in my family. And as someone who has managed over 120 hives, I can tell you there are no wildflower meadows. There's not much ecology on those golf courses. We've also got garden centres and car parks that are designated greenbelt. And again, we'll play Where's the Wildflower Meadow? But it's not just the homes that we're going to build on our greenbelt in Enfield as an outer London borough. We're also committing to London's largest rewilding project, 1,400 hectares of council-owned farmland and green space, beavers that we've reintroduced to London, and so much more. It is an investment of over 70 million over 20 years, most of it coming from us, some of it coming from government, some of it coming from local business and national business, and S106. Chair, I'm gonna save a lot of my comments for later, but I want to be very clear. If we want to have a serious conversation about tackling the housing crisis and about growing the economy, we have got to look at our green belt. We've got to look at all sites that are available. And I'm not talking about lush woodland. I'm talking about car parks, garden centres, golf courses, and about farmland that's not being used anymore. Thank you.
Thank you all very much for your answers. Assembly Member Boff.
Mr. Pike, you told us there's no way you're going to accommodate 88,000 in London. Is that something you've said to the government?
Sorry, I just said that you can't accommodate 880,000 within the current built form. So areas that are built out, densifying further those built out areas would not accommodate 880,000 homes.
That's something you've told the government?
Well, the government already know that. I mean, it's already part of our discussions between officials.
So in those discussions,
I mean, that's why they have. Yeah. I would assume that is why they have brought forward the MPPF policy they have on Greenbelt.
Did you therefore argue for that target to come down?
No.
Well, why not?
It's a target that's set by... I don't know, did you argue for the previous government's target of 980 to come down? No, you did not.
I did, actually, but, you know...
Well, I'd like to see what you did. I'd like to see where you did. I'd like to see where you did. Anyway, the government has decided that instead of having London, the MPPF rule that allowed people in exceptional circumstances to set their own needs figure under the SHMA, that was removed from the MPPF, and the target is now set centrally. Right. And that figure is 880,000 homes over 10 years.
And Councillor Erbil, how should the Mayor work with councils on local housing delivery and the designation of green belt and metropolitan open land?
We're already working shoulder to shoulder with the Mayor. We'll continue to do so to build the homes that we desperately need. For example, Meridian Water, the example I gave earlier, and currently we're having productive conversations with our GLA counterparts and with our brilliant Deputy Mayor, Jules Pipe, on building homes, not just on the brownfield, but also a sensible conversation on the greenbelt.
Do you think you should build on parkland?
We are looking at all available sites, and all of the sites that we put forward in our local plan get scrutiny. They get consulted on, and
so you do think you should build on parkland?
No, what I've just said is we're looking at all sites that we've put in our local
parkland
plan
as well.
Sorry,
you're looking at parkland to build on. Is that what
we're looking at greenbelt land, and as part of our local plan consultation, we've made it very clear that where there are going to be developments, we're also going to unlock the greenbelt to make it accessible.
So
if there is parkland,
so you are going to build on parkland.
There are 96 sites in our local plan. 96 sites in our local plan. Some of that is greenbelt, some of it is greybelt, some of it is brownfield, and they all get extra scrutiny and they get consulted on.
Are some of those parks? Are some of those 96 parks?
They are what are considered greenbelt currently, but they haven't been reviewed in a long time, and they're currently being scrutinised.
I'm not asking you if they're greenbelt. I'm asking you if they're parks.
And I've just answered.
They are parks.
We have 25...
You're saying that you are looking at parks to build on.
We have some beautiful parks and open spaces.
And you're going to build on them?
No, we're not going to build on them. What I've just said to you is we're looking at sites that are considered greenbelt. What I've just said to you, we're looking at sites that are considered greenbelt, and they're all getting scrutiny and consultation currently.
So you are looking at the possibility of building on parks?
We are not looking at the possibility of building on parks because...
so if there is a park, can you say that you won't build on them?
There are 96 sites in our local plan consultation. Yeah. Some of them are greenbelt.
You're repeating yourself. And unfortunately, I'm repeating the question because I haven't got an answer. Are you considering building on parkland?
We are considering building on car parks, garden centres and golf courses. You're more than welcome to have a look at the 96 sites. I don't know them all off by heart.
I could
that
do
we've
that.
Put forward.
I'm happy to do that. But you still haven't answered the question. Are you looking at building on parks?
Some of them, the question's been tabled quite a number of times.
It's been tabled but not answered, Chair. And I don't know why the councillor doesn't want to answer it. You could say yes or you could say no.
I'm happy to provide a full list of the sites that we've proposed in our local plan, Chair, if that's helpful to the Assembly member.
So are there parks in those 96 sites?
Some of that is greenbelt, some of that is open space that's not being used, it's farmland that's not being used,
what about
it's garden centres, it's car parks.
Are you looking at open space that is being used, commonly called a park?
What we are doing to our green spaces is we're restoring it. As I've mentioned earlier, 1,400 hectares of council-owned green spaces
parks in
that we're
Enfield,
restoring.
Which one of the existing parks, and we're talking parks, are they included as places that you want to build on?
I'm happy to provide a full list of our sites in our local plan. In fact,
are there any
online. In the interest of discussion, the same questions being tabled.
I think the councillor
we've got an answer.
The councillor absolutely has indicated that he doesn't want to answer the question because he is building on parks. Otherwise, he could say, no, we aren't going to build on parks. That would be a very easy thing for you to say, councillor. But you're not saying it, are you? Let's move on. Do you think that metropolitan open land, bearing in mind the mayor had a previous commitment to metropolitan open land that was equal to his commitment to green belt, do you think the mayor wants to build on metropolitan open land as well?
Is that to me?
Yes.
So as I've mentioned earlier, we're working shoulder to shoulder with the mayor. We are currently working really closely with our GLA colleagues, looking at land in our borough, most of it council-owned, where there could be infrastructure-based, infrastructure-first developments. So what does that mean? That means low-rise buildings next to some of our most beautiful green spaces. That means more jobs. That means more commercial spaces. That means growing the economy and making sure we've got the homes to tackle homelessness.
Are these beautiful green spaces included in the 96 that you want to build on?
I'm happy to give you a full list of the sites. I can't go through it currently.
Well, you must know.
96 sites,
Surely
more
you
than
know.
happy for you
Councillor,
to...
You can't say that you don't know what's in the 96, do you, and whether or not there's any parks
I didn't say that. I said I don't.
Oh,
I don't
you do
have.
know.
I do know the 96 sites.
And you do
I
know
don't
that
have
there
the
are
names.
parks in
I
there?
don't have the names to
I don't
hand.
want the names. I just want a simple answer. Do you know of the 96?
Assembly member, for years we had no real investment in home building. We had no real investment.
That's an alert.
We had
The residents
non-serious
Menfield,
governments
you're losing your
who did
parkland
not tackle the housing crisis.
You are
Finally,
losing
we've
your
got some
parkland.
support on
You
that.
might as well go and visit it, walk your dog as soon as you can, because it's going to disappear. How much... what would you say to those residents who are concerned by the changes?
Is that to me again?
Yes.
We're building 2 brand new parks, in fact, one called Edmonton Marshes. I'd love to invite you once it's completed. We're building 2 of the largest parks in London for the first time in 10 years. As I mentioned earlier, we're spending upwards of 60 million, nearly 70 million on restoring our green belt, on making it more accessible to Joe Public.
Of course, in Meridian Water, which you seem to be very proud of, it also... There's a considerable amount of strategic industrial land. You could build houses there, couldn't you?
We are building houses there. So in fact, we have. In fact, let me answer the question if that's okay. Chair, I'd love to answer the question.
Assemblyman, please let the guest
So when I became leader, Assemblymember, when I became leader, I visited Meridian Water to do a key handover ceremony with some of our brand new residents. I met a lovely resident called Tina. Tina secured her first home thanks to council investment in Meridian Water. We also helped Tina find a job through our Job Finders service, and we built her a train station at Meridian Water train station. This is what this investment looks like. It's called changing lives. So Meridian Water has had its strategic works still undergoing. We've, as I've said, built 300 homes last year, 300 homes to be built this year, and 800 to be built next year. 10,000 homes in total, 6,000 jobs.
So, of the strategic industrial land on Meridian Water, have you entertained the idea of building homes on the strategic industrial land?
We currently are building homes on Meridian Water, on brownfield sites.
On the strategic industrial land?
Member, I believe this panel was relating to Green Belt Review. I'm not sure where you're going with the question.
Well, because if you're so desperate to build on the parks, which you confirmed earlier, perhaps you should consider building on somewhere else first. And strategic industrial land is considerable in Enfield and could accommodate an awful lot of homes.
We are building on, we want to build on the garden centres, golf courses and car parks, not on the parks. Yeah. So let me just make that very clear.
Oh, you're not going to build on parks?
We currently are building in places like Meridian Water. It just won't be enough. It just won't be enough. Unless we want extra density in already dense areas, we just cannot have it. If we're serious about building family-sized homes, affordable ones, then we've got to have a serious conversation about what's considered green belt.
I don't think this was a serious conversation, but if we move on, could we...
I think we just have a supplementary on that from Assemblymember Lord Bailey.
I want to come to Alice, completely different question here, and I'm going to come to you slightly, Jules, maybe. Alice, you talked about the number of homes building and that building our way out of it is not possible because it's about affordability. But isn't the number of homes an important component of how affordable housing is?
So this is an argument that's used a lot, that by building homes that we bring prices down, but that doesn't actually look at tenure or distribution. So if you build homes, you have to provide affordable homes within that. And of course, you have to look at what kind of affordable you need. Do you need to provide social housing? So the problem in London is we've lost so much social housing. That means that we can't put people in a house when they become homeless. And that's why they're in temporary accommodation. So that's the acute end, but that is the biggest problem by a very long way. So what I'm saying is that if you build homes, if you just build houses for sale without that being for social rent, that doesn't actually tackle the problem. So we're building homes in London. Obviously, we're building somewhere 30,000, 40,000, 50,000 if we've done really well, and it hasn't been that high for a number of years. Population hasn't risen at the same rate, actually, so we have more houses now. Population has risen, houses have risen faster, prices have risen exponentially compared to both of those. So what I'm saying is that this idea that you jump from we not building enough homes to we're going to solve the housing crisis is very dishonest. What I'm saying is that to solve the housing crisis, you have to talk about rent controls. You have to talk about those people who we're all talking about who can't afford to pay their rent and work out how to get them a roof over the head where they can afford the rent.
But far be it from me to defend the Mayor. Jules and the Mayor and I have had lots of stand-up rows about what's being delivered in London. At no point has anybody said there shouldn't be an abundance of social housing in whatever we provide. And one thing where I think the Mayor and I would probably agree, what's made social housing so tough to deliver in London is just land value. I want to put on record I completely disagree with your idea about rent controls. It's the best way to destroy a city. But we are not talking about just building lots of houses. We are talking about tenure as well. So bearing that in mind, do you think you'll be able to meet this conversation slightly differently? Because I again, Jules can testify, we've had a lot of fights, but it's always been about how much social housing, not if social housing.
Look, I know that everybody thinks that we need social housing, and the question is how we're going to get that built. But I don't know if anybody really believes that we're going to be able to afford to actually buy that social housing, which is effectively what we have to do, unless we finance it. The only other way to get people to be able to afford to pay their rent is by somehow controlling rents, or to give them security of tenure over, say, a 4-year period, rather than a short-hold tenancy where they can effectively be chucked out because landlords will still be able to raise rents. And there will continue to be pressure on the private rented sector because people will continue to not be able to buy a home. So
I'll come to you, Ben.
So yeah. We need to find a way to bring rents and household costs for being housed in line with income. And yeah, if you think that we're going to build enough social housing to do that, then great. But if you don't, then my question is, well, what do we do? And what I'm saying to you is that I do not believe that building homes in the Greenbelt is going to solve that problem.
OK. I just asked a question for clarification. Ben, please do.
Thank you. I'm just going to chip in on Alice's point and say that we need both. In fact, we need more than both. I think we need to pull every lever possible to address the housing crisis, and everything should be on the table. It might be ruled out eventually, but it should be on the table to begin with to have a look at that. I'll just give the context to the cost of renting, which Alice was talking about. The average rent for a private renter in London, as was said before, this is 3 million people in London. 1/3 of London is privately renting. The average rent is £2,121 for a home. If you look 4 years ahead, someone paying the average rent, they've given £100,000 over to their landlord in just 4 years. It's a huge amount of wealth transfer happening right now. There's no chance of these homes being built in that time enough to take the pressure off of private renters. So that's why you need to combine it with a sensible slamming of the brakes on the soaring rent. So you need to limit the rent rises. It's right that the Mayor has been calling to national government to give him those powers. National government hasn't listened as of yet, but we really hope they do take something through when they further devolve powers to the Mayor. And in doing so, it would be really appreciated if this Assembly could be a strong voice favouring those caps.
Ben, can I intervene because the Chair will stop
important.
me soon? I'm going to say absolutely no to that because rent controls are disgraceful, have a terrible effect down the line on maintenance and who we can subsidise housing for. So no, but I absolutely recognise, as someone who's born and raised in London, I absolutely recognise how you describe the cost of rent, the soaring cost of rent, the £100,000. I accept that. I'm just asking a basic question. Maybe you've answered it. That increasing the supply has to be part of that answer, surely.
It does. In a nutshell, yes. But absolutely the caveats of the more social housing available, the better. Second to that, more affordable housing, the better, and making sure that it's where people want to live is really important. So the emphasis in the London plan, as proposed to build around transport infrastructure, for example, is going to be really, really important, because you don't want to be building new towns or new developments where no one wants to live, because in the end, the lower income Londoners will be pushed into those places, and that's just fundamentally unfair.
I fully agree with you. Thank you, Chair. Back to you.
Assembly Member Boff.
Thank you. Is the 88,000 homes per year realistic, perhaps, to Mr. Toomey?
I'm not an expert enough. There's others on this panel that would be able to tell you how realistic it is to deliver within the next 10 years. It's certainly unlikely, I think, to reach that early. So you're probably going to have to overcompensate later down the line to make sure that you're building more than 88,000 in a few years' time. But whether it's realistic or not, it's what's been deemed to be necessary in order to build the homes that are needed. So I think in responding to that need, that's why I'm saying every lever needs to be pulled to make that happen, because the consequence of it otherwise is the debt, poverty and homelessness that we see.
So we could ruin the green belt even though we're not going to have the capacity to build our homes?
I mean, that's a question for another panellist, I think, but the capacity to build another home...
Another panellist is Mr. Stevens.
I think the 88,000 figure is absolutely needed, given the population pressures in London. The increase.
I didn't ask whether or not it was needed, or whether or not it was realistic.
Realistic? It will be a challenge to deliver, and you could argue that perhaps a better way to meet the need, because the 88,000 is a component of the government's overall target for 370 a year. You could say that perhaps a better way to deal with that would be through a series of new towns out across the wider southeast, but the government has decided it wants 88,000 within London. That will be challenging, given that the average or the best rate of delivery in London, I think for the past 20 years, this is based upon the GLA's own residential completions dashboard, is around 48,000. So you're looking at an effective doubling in order to get to 88,000. It will be extremely challenging, and I don't think it's going to be met within the first 10 years of the London plan, but that doesn't mean that you shouldn't be aiming to deliver it. And I think the review of the Greenbelt to identify locations which are suitable for residential development, which will have the least environmental harm, which don't contribute to the purposes of the Greenbelt, is an entirely legitimate political exercise, and it needs to be done in order to accommodate London's population.
Oh, I didn't expect to be agreeing with you in this meeting, but I absolutely do agree with you about new towns. But the government's decided to take a different option. New towns are, along with the Green Belt, the post-war most successful policies that we've had in this country, because Green Belt does what it did exactly as what it's designed to do, and new towns worked extremely well, and I don't know why they went out of fashion.
Possibly because they don't have the political support of local authorities outside in the wider southeast.
Yeah, this is all politics. There's the Green Belt the Golden Rule requirements for house builders to fulfil 3 criteria. Are you confident that you can do that?
If you'd asked me that 4 years ago, I would have been very confident that they could secure half of all homes as affordable homes in any new development. I think the new financial circumstances that prevail across London, rise in labour costs, rise in material costs, declining ability of registered social landlords to acquire Section 106 affordable homes, and incidentally, house builders have been responsible for the construction of all socially rented homes over the last 10 years. Registered providers don't provide social rented homes anymore, and we provided half of all affordable homes in this country through Section 106 planning obligations. But I think the ability to deliver 50% affordable housing would be, I think, pretty challenging. It is something, nevertheless, to aim for. It is certainly more achievable on land released from the Greenbelt than it would be through brownfield
These
development.
requirements are pretty much in the London Plan already, aren't they?
Well, the requirement is for a minimum of 35% to benefit from the fast-track route, 50% on publicly owned land.
And where are you
and that isn't really working at the moment. Sorry,
I beg your pardon.
It isn't really working at the moment because of the inability of registered providers, the financial pressures they've coming under, the end of no certainty over long-term rent settlement. Their ability to contract is severely limited. Plus, as I said, rising material and labour costs means that it's now harder for house builders to commit to the minimum 35%. But in the longer term, as I said, I think it's going to be easier to secure higher volumes of affordable housing on Greenbelt releases than it would be on previously developed land in London.
Yeah, I mean, as we've seen, residential social landlords have seen what rent control does. Destroys investment, reduces the number of homes. So I'm glad you made that point. Where are you going to get all the builders? Are we also entering into a golden age of immigration to get these builders from wherever we can?
I think the construction skill challenges facing the sector is a very important issue, and it is an issue of major concern. It's one of our top concerns at the moment. I think we've had a failure to organise adult skills training adequately in this country for the last 20 years. The house building industry is now working increasingly on that, including with Homes England and the NHBC on the development of skills hubs so that we can accelerate skills training for younger people. And that includes looking at the nature of construction industry training courses where you can actually look at, say, skills training which takes place in a far more rapid way that doesn't require the full qualifications associated with many full-time education courses at the moment. There are various ways in which we're looking to rapidly train up people in construction skills. But I think the bigger issue for us at the moment in London is that we are losing skills because the rate of house building is declining, because schemes have just not been approved. They've been caught by the building safety regulator. They've been caught by the inability of registered providers to contract to acquire Section 106 affordable homes. And that is actually a greater risk to the industry, a short-term loss of skills to elsewhere in the country, or people moving back overseas if they're foreign employed labour, moving back overseas because the job opportunities, the work opportunities are just not materialising in London because of that slowdown in completions which we're seeing in the drop-off, the grievous drop-off in approvals and completions in London.
Mr. Pipe, if you're determined to force the boroughs to allocate Greenbelt to housing, could you at least make a commitment that that should be family-sized housing?
Well, we're undertaking a SHMAR process that will identify the size of housing need across London, and that will inform what requirements are in the plan. I would like to say that. I mean, we've heard a number of things about affordability, and I entirely agree with Alice that it's not going to reduce prices. The best best hope we can hope for is that over the long term, perhaps they might not rise so much, and that's the best economists can suggest. But as I come back to where I started from, that's because the word honesty or dishonesty has been used a number of times. We have never said that this identifying space for homes and enough space for homes, it is being done to make things more affordable. The issue about viability and affordability is today's problem that we have to tackle now. This is the 880,000 is a long-term planning issue that we're looking at over a 10-year horizon.
But do you not recognise the particular need for family-sized housing? I mean, Mr. Toomey pointed out that 80,000 children living in temporary accommodation, 350,000 children living in overcrowded conditions, and that figure has remained persistent.
Absolutely, but you see, that's
more
what's driving.
Than a decade.
Absolutely, that's what's driving, the government's agenda and its housing methodology, which isn't a world away from previous housing methodologies. I mean, it gets tweaked, and that's why the number varies up and down, normally upwards. But you know, the homelessness and the fact that, you know, something like 1 in 21 children are homeless, and that boroughs are spending £4 million a day in London on homelessness is what's driving the numbers over the longer term. And clearly, family-sized accommodation needs to be part of that and will be part of that, and as I said, will be identified by the SHMA. But if family-sized accommodation is code for, you know, 3-bed semis with parking outside for 3 cars, which unfortunately for some people it is, then there's probably not going to be much of that built going forward over the next 10 years, because that will require even more of the green belt to be released. At the end of the day, you know, we need to recognise that the most sustainable kind of city is a dense and compact city. And if we do have to reluctantly release parts of the green belt, it needs to be sweated and to accommodate the optimum, not the maximum, but the optimum number of people to minimise the amount of release.
So families have got another excuse for moving out of London. We've already seen primary schools in inner London closing down because there is no family accommodation.
Sorry, Chair, I don't know whether I need to just say it more loudly.
Yeah.
Because the Assembly member doesn't seem to, despite the fact I've said it at least 3 times in my previous contribution, yes, family accommodation, family-sized accommodation, flats that are for families that have enough bedrooms for families. Is that enough, Assembly member, to get it across?
No, it clearly isn't.
That will be part of the requirement, the numbers required in the plan for each borough. I don't understand how it can be said more clearly, more explicitly.
Because you're explicitly and clearly you haven't read the last Planning Committee's report, which basically concluded that the kind of buildings that are going up, the tower blocks that are going to go on the green belt, are the most inappropriate places to bring up families, no matter how many bedrooms there are in there. Anyway, let's move
I think
on.
that can be a comment about the design of places, and we need to get the design of places right. But at the end of the day, the urban development now does tend towards being more dense, because that is what is viable. I mean,
dense places with gardens.
Huh?
There's plenty of dense places with gardens. Anyway.
Assemblyman, are we able to move on?
Yeah.
Thank you. James, you made a point about it being easier to deliver, or more viable to deliver, affordable homes on greenbelt sites than brownfield sites. I was just wondering if you could explain why that's the case a bit more. I presume it's to do with issues like decontaminating previous developed land, but yeah, a greater explanation would be welcome.
Yes, that will be an element. You won't have the need to clear sites so much, unless, of course, it's a car park or another piece of hard standing. But you won't have to spend so much money on clearing that site, decontamination. Potentially, it's going to be cheaper to acquire at existing use value. And there are provisions in the planning and infrastructure bill associated with compulsory purchase at existing use value, i.e. denying to the owner their hope value. A fairly controversial topic, but and one that the HBF isn't necessarily in support of. But it's a mechanism which the government intends to introduce, coupled with the ability I think it's set out in the devolution white paper, for mayors to be able to establish mayoral development corporations without the express consent of the constituent local authority, in order to deliver things like development zones, potentially gives the Mayor of London mechanisms to acquire land more cheaply and develop that land faster. But yeah, if the land is cheaper to acquire and there are fewer remediation or preparation costs associated with it, then you can expect more affordable homes on that site.
Thank you. Assembly Member Garbett.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a quick question for the Deputy Mayor and then one for Alice. Just going back to the 88,000 a year figure, what are the problems with using that as a figure without an assessment of the housing need or qualifying tenure?
What do you mean without that?
things like the fact that 50% of the homes built in the last year in London were built to rent, and I think it's interesting within discussions that we know that places like Brent saw a huge increase in rents in the area. So it's how are we thinking about those 88,000 homes around the homes that we genuinely need and the ones that are going to have a positive impact in their totality? So, like, making sure that they are genuinely affordable homes.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the plan itself obviously can use the information garnered through the SHMA process for determining tenure need, size need and tenure need. And so we will have a good handle on that for the plan as to how many homes, what percentage of that 880,000 homes over the 10-year period, how many of them need to be socially rented, how many need to be intermediate. And that's, as I've said on many a platform before now, that is the huge question going forward, because just building market homes and just tithing a certain percentage of those market homes is a model that is not going to work for building 80k over 10 years. There would need to be enormous amounts of public subsidy to be able to tailor tenure supply with tenure need.
And just a question on where we are with the new London plan. Has there been an analysis for the London plan of the wider impacts of tenures, things like I mentioned the build to rent and the impact it has on the local area on increasing private rents? Has that analysis been done?
I don't know about that specific analysis, but we obviously there is a lot of work being done on, as I say, on tenure need, and obviously the capacity of the sector to bring those required tenures forward. I mean, I think there would actually have to be quite a reliance on build to rent going forward, because the market could not possibly absorb more than, I don't know, 35, 40,000 homes a year. And so the balance would have to be rented tenure of some sort. And as I said, most of that at quite deep discounts to meet tenure demand.
I guess that's what I'm kind of questioning, that if the aim is to make London's housing more affordable, but there's evidence to show that those models increase rents, then it's just how are we making sure that we're not adding to the problem? Because we also know that we're kind of leaking out homes as well, those social homes that are not being delivered quickly enough in kind of developer-led solutions. So it's how is the London plan taking that analysis, I guess is my question.
Well, that'll be part of the development of it going forward. At the moment, we're just at the consultation stage. We're very much kind of open. We're calling for views, ideas, and evidence, crucially. So things like that about the dynamics of rentals and how that's been influenced by what's been built in proximity to it is
great.
It will make that all the richer.
Alice, I was going to ask a question to you. I've got a quote here from your chief executive, which I know that you've been alluding to this. So building on London's dwindling green spaces won't do anything to tackle the biggest challenge facing Londoners looking for a home with sky-high prices, which I know you've been talking about as being the issue here. So my question is, what approaches to resolving London's housing crisis with CPRE support? I know you've mentioned rent controls, but I just wondered if there was other things that you wanted to speak about. And just to counter Lord Bailey's point, I fully support rent controls. I think also they would bring down the government's responsibility of having to pay 70 billion over the next 5 years through local housing allowance, and we could use that money differently. There we go. So, what other things does CPRE support?
Well, first of all, I should say, we're certainly not, saying we shouldn't build homes. We should, but we're questioning whether that's going to mean that in 10 years we're not still facing the same housing crisis. So, on that basis, we think that we should be having a strategy to deal with that. So, well, was it 2020, the Affordable Housing Commission released their report, which said we need a 20-year housing strategy. And part of that is house building. But a house building strategy is not a housing strategy. So I'm not a housing specialist. I'm just here because people constantly say to solve the housing crisis, we have to build on the Greenbelt. But I've had to think about this, and not least because I keep running into people where I live who say that they've just had to move 9 times before getting their family home for them and their 3 young kids. So, that's just, not okay. And we have to think about that too. So, yeah, rent controls have to be in that mix, don't they? But why are we talking about working with mutuals who can actually plan longer term? Are we talking about building with community land trusts who can build and sell or set up homes in trust so that they can be sold on only at an inflationary increase rate? Let's get all of those things on the table and be honest about the fact that just building homes isn't going to solve this, short term or long term.
Great, thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Yeah, Assembly Member Lord Bailey.
James, you described how it would be easier for developers to build on greenbelt land, and you made it sound cheaper, which equals better, easier. Isn't that the temptation then to just ignore some of the brownfield we have and just start out on greenfield sites? Surely that's going to happen.
Well, it's not happening on brownfield land at the moment, is it? I mean, the rate of completions approvals is falling in London. It's fallen to a drastically low level, as I alluded to previously. I'm just trying to check it's all available on the GLA's irreproachable statistics. It's GLA dashboard, and completions are falling as well. So you are in a crisis situation, and what can you do in order to try and alleviate some of those issues, including deliver affordable homes rapidly? Greenbelt is a perfectly legitimate and sensible option. If brownfield development is very difficult to deliver, and you've got problems associated with the building safety regulator and the Gateway 2 and 3 processes, which is delaying considerably the approval of schemes and signing off schemes that are stuck at reserved matters, then I think Greenbelt, looking at the Greenbelt, is absolutely vital. And but it's a long-term process. As I said earlier, it's not going to translate quickly into delivery within the next 5 years. The GLA the Mayor will have to undertake an assessment of the most appropriate locations where Greenbelt doesn't contribute to the purposes. He will need to signal where those locations are in
Sorry to interrupt you, James, but it sounds like you're advocating Greenbelt first.
Well, you might come to that. Yeah, politically, that might be what's required. Because if you have to prepare a London plan which demonstrates that you can deliver 88,000 homes a year, and the London plan will do what it can to maximise brownfield output, including looking at incremental intensification around transport hubs, something that I absolutely support. But it will still need to demonstrate how it can deliver 88,000 homes a year. And it's unavoidable that Greenbelt release is going to be a component of that land supply.
Yeah, but there's a difference between being a component and being first.
If it's part of the... the Mayor of London will undertake that exercise. And in undertaking that exercise to identify where deliverable land is, he might be able to conclude that Greenbelt release by the boroughs won't be necessary until some date in the future. But we haven't seen the outcome of that exercise. But he has to demonstrate he has a deliverable land supply to maintain delivery over the next 5 years. So that might well require Greenbelt release, including potentially Greenbelt release at the same time as you're developing brownfield land.
Is that the case, Jules? Is that part of the plan? Is it Greenbelt first?
The Mayor was very clear to say brownfield first.
I'm just asking, Jules. This is my job.
Absolutely. The Mayor did say, and is sticking to, it's absolutely brownfield first. And as James said, it's quite a long journey to land actually being released. It is probably several years, 4 or 5 years even. At the end of the day, land isn't released until a borough in this manner. I mean, obviously, land of any sort can be released from its planning designation on an ad hoc basis, as you know, if an application is made. determines whether how closely a borough wants to the decision maker wants to stick with the policy, or if they feel that there are exceptional circumstances to depart from the policy. But to actually release Greenbelt in a planned way, it would have to be done through the local plan. So it's not until the local plans come up for review, and there are 33.
So the mayor can't set up a mayoral corporation, do it that way, because
at the end of the day, a mayoral development corporation would have to stick with the local plan until it's brought its own plan forward.
But it could bring its own plan forward and do it.
It could, but then that's still several years of hurdles.
The chair's going to stop me, so I quickly want to ask Alice something. Alice, do you believe? Does this conversation make you believe it's going to be Greenbelt first? Are you sitting there believing that?
Yeah, we have significant concerns that that's basically what's going on. In fact, the comments here are basically saying, well, it's more affordable. Well, but maybe that's because, you know, that's a kind of effective push for government subsidy for social housing, which makes viability work, which basically allows you your 20% profit. And that's just more government money going into house building, which doesn't solve the housing crisis.
Well, it does, if you can put people in the house. But you and I will have to have that conversation offline. The issue is, though, you are advocating for subsidised housing. And the point is, it doesn't matter where and when it's subsidised, as long as it is subsidised, and the government are going to have to pay. So why does this make any difference to rent controls? Or?
Well, the Greenbelt is incredibly important to the environment and, you know, to stopping us have urban sprawl, which is also an environmental disaster. But actually, the point here is that that if we're going to talk about building, which we need to do, then let's build it on the brownfield sites. We've got them. We need to build them out. Why do we need to build? Yeah, we need to avoid at all costs a greenfield first policy or greenbelt first policy, and that also allows for speculation. You know, we know that land's changing hands already, and Enfield has been changing hands, and that forces prices up again. So all you do is you end up in a worse situation. And we also know, you know, we've mapped a lot of land in London, which is effectively being sat on, doing nothing, where it could be in agricultural use or used for sports fields. It's just sitting there doing nothing. So from our point of view, actually you should be designating land for those purposes so that it's clear, and then those landowners should be required to enable land to be used for something rather than it sitting there doing nothing at all. And that's like really in the middle of London, in Newham. There's huge sites which are being sat on by, you know, which are protected, being sat on.
Okay.
So yeah, we're very, very worried that this will end up in effectively a Greenbelt first or indeed an MOL first approach.
Okay, thank you, Chair.
Assembly Member Wilson.
Thank you, Chair. I think we all know that this is a contentious subject, and like a lot of contentious subjects, can get quite political. I think last week's plenary debate showed that, and also I've seen the rather charming social media graphic that the Tories have put out with me with a hard hat on. Yeah, thanks for that. It's very fetching. But because it's contentious, I think it is right to think about alternatives and discuss kind of in the round. And interesting suggestion, new towns, James. Assembly Member Boff mentioning the same thing. I just wonder, there's a question to you, Alice, how would CPRE react if an alternative policy of new towns was put out? Because I presume that would be in greenfield and rural areas, and I'm sure you'd probably have a problem with that too.
Well, I think we define new towns as rough 10,000, and we know that there are development sites in London which are that size. If we need to build, then we should be building that kind of scale of home in areas which can accommodate 10,000 on brownfield. We know that that's possible across the country. I kind of keep saying we need to look at the real grey belt, which is the gigantic quantities of land which are given to surface car parking. So places like Stevenage, for example. I mean, it's not just small amounts, it's huge amounts of land in the town centre, right next to the train station, which are, you know, kind of called retail parks. In fact, they're just a massive car park with some retail, of course. So if you thought about it, you could put a whole new town in Stevenage without any difficulty. And that is not the only place you can do that. So we don't support new towns in the middle of the countryside where you're building them as car dependent and low density often, we would support, and we very much do support, in fact we very much promote building on what we call the real grey belt, which is those areas. And if you'd like to go to a tool that somebody in Leeds created called Parkulator, you can go to any town in the whole world and it will tell you how many houses can be built at what they call London density, which is 100 dwellings per hectare, which is not actually that high density. And also at Paris and Barcelona density, if you're interested. And it's just staggering.
Assembly Member Bakari.
Thank you, Chair. I want to ask my question directly to the Deputy Mayor. And Deputy Mayor, I'm really pleased that you talked earlier about the honesty being a frequent part of the conversation, which I've been listening to intently. So my question is on how you are going to make sure that the London Plan has an evidence-based approach to ensure that suitable sites are being developed.
We can. I can let you have a whole series of links to an enormous database of evidence that the team have been accumulating over the last 2 or 3 years, and it's all publicly available. That it's the data on which we draw to formulate the plan. Obviously, we've also put out the call for evidence as part of the Towards a London Plan document as well, and all of that will be publicly available.
And there will be a need to do some sort of collector data, data collection as well, and trials that will be taking place to review Greenbelt. And what areas are you looking at? Are you looking at outer London, inner London, where there are already large green spaces, or smaller green belt spaces? Have you got any details about the trials that will be taking place to collect that data?
Well, the Greenbelt review is being undertaken in all the 18 boroughs that have Greenbelt, and all those, as I think the panel heard earlier, all those areas of Greenbelt within the 18 boroughs will be assessed for how they perform against the Greenbelt purposes, and that will effectively be a database of I guess performance metrics for those spaces, and then that would be used by the GLA to assess the degree, the potential degree of release possible in a borough, and will inform us in the target that we set the boroughs, what we think is a reasonable share of the 180,000 over 10 years. And then it will be up to the borough to bring forward its local plan, incorporating all that data and London Plan requirements.
So you're not prioritising certain areas before others within this approach of the 18 that you've just referred to? There isn't a kind of a priority rating in terms of where you're doing your assessment?
Not at this point. I would guess that once the Greenbelt review has been completed, I suppose some locations will make themselves more evident for release than others by their, as a result of their determined quality and contribution to the Greenbelt purposes. So something that is is surrounded by development and is predominantly a car park. It's a bit of a cliched example, but I'm sure one exists. That would tend to probably lend itself to obvious release compared to something that is at the other end of the spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, the reason I'm asking this is that it's fair to say that when the Mayor made his statement, there was nervousness across the board, particularly in areas where there are a lot of green spaces, where there are nature reserve sites, parks, allotments, and the lack of detail is causing the nervousness from many parts of London where they have these sites, and they are worried. And the conversations that we've had today, it kind of highlights some of that nervousness. There's also been a lack of trust as well, and as you're well aware, in the area that I represent in Wimbledon, metropolitan open land that had a covenant that protected it. Was a piece of land that is now the Mayor of London has changed his position on in terms of protecting metropolitan open land, and you yourself are part of that decision of allowing tennis courts to be built there. And this is not housing. This is tennis courts being built on a piece of land that has many residents very upset about because of the danger that this will do to the local biodiversity. So, do you understand why there is concern and nervousness, and also this understandable lack of trust in this process?
I can understand the how can I describe it? The often where there is confusion, because some of these things are not clear cut. Planning policy is decided upon, established, codified, but planning policies are rarely, if ever, gateway decisions. Legally, they're not gateway decisions. So decisions against policy can be made if the decision maker feels that it's justified, and that is the legal position. So there have always been developments on Greenbelt and MOL, but they have been taken contrary to policy because the decision maker felt there were sufficient grounds for making that departure from the established policy. So one can have an overarching policy of protection and not resile from that overarching policy and believing in it, but occasionally there will be exceptions. I remember things that have come forward on Greenbelt that were for 100% affordable housing, and it was an enabling development for something else to happen, and it was just and the borough was enthusiastic and we acquiesced to it. Similarly, metropolitan land, the mayor is remaining committed to metropolitan open land. That's why we want to disentangle the metropolitan land protection from Greenbelt protection, because with the change in the MPPF and bringing Greenbelt into consideration, that drags with it MOL because of London Plan policy. So we want to disaggregate those so that we can maintain strong protections on MOL, and people don't. It's not mistakenly taken in to the wider Greenbelt review. As I say, the issue with Wimbledon was a specific local issue, and taken in the context of the previous London Plan and the previous metropolitan land protection.
It was an
and it was
issue
considered that there was an exception.
United all political groups, the former Conservative MP, the current Liberal Democrat MP, the current Labour MP, Wandsworth Council, and many, many local residents were against this plan. So it does seem like a lot of people will be feeling a lack of trust even within this process of a consultation of whether their views will be fully represented, and when these decisions are being made, whether those local views are going to be made based on local boroughs. As you've been saying again and again, it is based on local borough decisions. And when it does come down to it, even that doesn't seem to be clearly the case. So there is major, major concern, and I understand that. But I'll leave it there.
Thank you.
I do have just one quick question. Sorry, Chair, before I finish. You've also talked about, Jules, the fact that, the need for honesty about the affordable homes, and the fact that, all these homes may not be affordable. But what about accessibility? People have been talking about accessibility in terms of transport links. That's great. But what about accessibility in the homes themselves? Can you make some guarantees as well to many of the disabled Londoners who've been campaigning to making sure that if homes are built, they are truly accessible? Would that be within the London plan itself, that we can, have that really highly prioritised, as well as affordability?
Yes, I don't see there being any exceptions. I would not want to see anything in the plan that gave some sort of departure from existing policy, or any general policy, new policy that was in the plan, just because it was in the Greenbelt. We've already seen the requirement that the government has said for a 15% premium on Greenbelt in affordable housing. So actually, if anything, the burden is greater. But accessibility, whether in terms of transport or whether actually we're talking disability access within a development, within a home, it would be completely unacceptable to me and to the Mayor to see any dilution of policies simply because it was in the Greenbelt.
And even maybe in some increased focus as well. That would be good to see the Mayor push this particular area. Thank you very much, Chair.
Assembly Member Boff.
Very quickly, I wanted this to be a question, but we haven't got time. The Mayor repeatedly states that only 13% of the Greenbelt is either parks or publicly accessible spaces. Could you provide us with a map or list of that to justify that percentage?
Happy to ask for that, Chair.
Thank you.
Assembly Member Baker.
Thank you. My question is to Deputy Mayor. It's following up on Metropolitan Open Land. I know we're really up against it, so I'll try and keep it brief. So you've mentioned Metropolitan Open Land, that the Mayor continues to be absolutely still committed to it, but obviously there is in the consultation document, it's, I don't know what the phrase, I don't know what it is, but it's basically sort of considering reviewing whether the purposes of being accessible to public and having biodiversity value are applicable to all of those. What's that process? What's your current thinking about what that process of looking at those sites would be?
I mean, at the moment, it would be obviously these things considered on an ad hoc basis.
Yeah.
And as happened at Wimbledon, I would be. I mean, it's not going to be a review similar to the Greenbelt, but no. I think there is a case to be made for such sites being brought forward, and really that is. I mean, it's been a bit characterised somewhat as the golf course clause.
Yes.
And I think there is a justification for looking, as Councillor Erbil said, about when one has something like 11 golf courses with limited public access, and many of them with limited biodiversity value. And yes, it would be so positive if people wanted to bring forward public parks on those sites and increase nature and improve the biodiversity. But realistically, I think that's only going to happen on part of those sites if also part of those sites are also brought forward for housing. And this isn't a kind of a war on golf courses. This is a kind of very limited, exceptional thing. And so I'd need to go away and reflect on process.
So maybe I can clarify. So what you're saying is there won't be sort of a strategic look at all MOL that might potentially end up with some sites that should be MOL actually, that under these and some no longer designated that. It's saying that there would be an opportunity to consider. People could sort of pitch in on any MOL sites, but that. Yeah, I'm just trying to work out, because of course if it's, what does that actually mean in practice? Because, OK, we have talked about golf courses, but there are lots of other sites which are very, very valued, designated as MOL, and so don't necessarily want to sort of,
Yeah, I think, Joe, it's probably best if I come back with specific wording on the position, because it's one of those issues where I don't want to give a blanket assurance when actually even yesterday, a year ago, 2 years ago, I couldn't have given a blanket assurance that no MOL was ever brought forward for development, because it was. It was regularly, like it has been with Greenbelt. So I'd prefer to come back with you with specific wording, and we can share it with the panel and the committee.
I think that's fine, Chair. And just on that, is there an assessment of how many homes might be delivered? I mean, say on your golf courses who don't meet, targets for accessibility or biodiversity. Do you have sort of sub-targets that might be able to be delivered on those sites, or is it's just as
no, this is to be all
the same.
Looked at. Yeah.
Okay, no worries. Thanks to you.
Assemblymember Garbutt.
Thank you. I'm going to do some really quick questions. So, Alice, could you tell us about the applications to build on the golf courses, Wimbledon Park and Whitewebs Park, and what that has taught us about the risk of building on MOL or Greenbelt land?
Well, of course, yeah. Enfield's just given permission for the golf course to be taken over by a private company, Tottenham Hotspur. So, that doesn't fill us with confidence. We're waiting to hear if the Mayor's going to call it in, and we very much hope that won't go ahead. So golf courses, of course, you've got to be extremely careful how you talk about this, because then, if you give an idea that golf courses are up for grabs, then golf courses start to change hands. And in fact, the only accessible golf course that was where everybody played was the one in Enfield, which is now gone and is now being sold. Has been, So, yeah, really extremely worrying. The golf clause is extremely worrying, and we just want that deleted completely. MOL is unbelievably important within London. So many needs for it, and like I said before, if we feel that golf is over provisioned in London, then let's have a sensible conversation with the golf clubs, with the sports authorities more generally, because we have a big problem with lack of sports provision. There's no sports strategy. There's no London-wide sports pitch strategy. There's nothing really that makes me feel like we're, as a city, going to be able to provide the places for our kids and adults and everybody to play the sports that we need to play. And if we don't need them for that, then where are we going to be filtering the water from the rivers in the wetlands? Where are we going to be putting all this biodiversity habitat that we need that's about to come out in the LNRS? And indeed, what about the food security for London and agriculture? So Vicarage Farm, which is in Enfield, and so on, Trent Park, in case you needed that question answered in Enfield.
Thanks, Alice. I can see that counts it, yeah. And then I had a quick note.
Is that okay? Thank you. When I became a councillor 7 years ago, we were presented with the information that as Enfield Council, we were subsidising a golf course in spite of cuts, in spite of frontline cuts. We were spending about 100 grand a year on a golf course that no one plays at. It had some of the lowest numbers of registered members. Whitewebs golf course. We done the right thing as the council. We put the golf course out to tender, and we invited people to take over the golf course, because there are 7 other golf courses in Enfield, and none of them have that many members. It's a dying sport, and it's only a very small number of our residents who enjoy that lovely sport, but there are too many of those spaces, and they take up a lot of space, and they're designated green belt. Of the 3 organisations that bid for that golf course, Tottenham's Hotspur's women's football team was the most sensible. And I wasn't leader at the time, and I do not sit on planning committee, but as a resident of Enfield, I'm delighted that we are going to host the country's first professional women's football training ground in our borough, and as a Spurs fan, I'm even more delighted. Only a small part of the current golf course is going to be developed on. It's already got buildings on it, and the rest of the what was a golf course is going to be turned into accessible land. It's going to be a park, a brand new. It's a golf course. Alice, I'd love to invite you there one day. When I was walking with one of my toddlers, when it used to be a golf course, when we were walking with the pram, we were told to get off the golf course because we don't play. We were walking through.
I'm just gonna bring us back. I'm really aware of time.
And also,
so I've got a
Assembly
couple of other
Member, I'm
questions.
so sorry. We have a rolling land field where there's biodiversity net gain, green net gain, where if a developer builds on greenbelt land, they're expected to pay so that as the council we can plant the trees, build the wetlands, and we've done lots of wetlands to do all the restoration habitat, all of that good stuff that we do, and build actual wildflower meadows. And I just want to mention from an earlier, if you want to stop me, that's fine. We've got a good story to tell, and I'm happy to protect it.
And I think that whole conversation just shows that we do need to strategically think about land, who's using it, who's got access to it. And I was really interested about something you said earlier, Councillor, if you're able to share with us how you're consulting with people. You mentioned that you were consulting with people about the 96 sites that you've identified in your local plan. But if you can share that afterwards, I'd be really grateful, because I know that we're short on time and I want to ask the Deputy Mayor a quick question. I'm really concerned, as we've mentioned, that there's 300 homes on brownfield sites that haven't been built, including thousands of social homes. So I'm worried that if we rely on the same pattern of development around speculation and private-led building, that I'm concerned that we're going to end up in the same situation. So I'm wondering what you make of that risk and how building on the green belt won't result in those same problems.
Yeah, I mean, there's something about 300,000 homes, as you say, that haven't been built out yet. About 180,000 of them are part of phased developments that are in the process of being built out, so we can have some confidence about that 180,000. There's 120,000 in developments that have not started and have stalled for the myriad reasons that we've heard from probably all panellists today. Essentially, you can summarise it in one word, and that's viability. There's about a dozen different things we can talk about that leads to those viability problems, but it is essentially viability. There's a bifurcation between what people can afford to pay for them and what they cost to build. And when I say what people can afford to, I'm talking private buyers, private renters, and housing associations on what they can afford to pay. We need to intervene in the market effectively to make those things more viable, essentially subsidy. And we continue to make that case to the government. And to your point about what would prevent those from people just like ignoring those and those 120 and going on to Greenbelt, as I said earlier, we would need to have procedures within the plan that strongly directed a brownfield first approach to ensure that brownfield came forward before greenbelt. But like all policies, it can't be a gateway. It wouldn't be legally possible to exhaust all brownfield supply before greenbelt came forward. As I say, people make greenfield applications now under current policy and have done always, and sometimes they can make exception cases. It's going to become more complicated as as we get closer to boroughs producing new plans, and as I say, we would have to be smart in the way we brought forward procedures in the next plan to strongly encourage brownfield first.
Yeah, and it was just the kind of frame around developer-led approaches that I'm concerned about. But yeah, I'm very aware I need to pass back. But just while I've got you here, Deputy Mayor, just to make a comment that I've raised this with the Mayor, that the accessible versions of the London Plan consultation aren't readily available, and disabled organisations are really concerned that disabled Londoners are missing out on participating in the consultation. I've raised it with the Mayor and I'm waiting for a response, but just to put that on your radar.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Assembly Member Baker.
Very, very briefly, Jules, how will the Mayor ensure the necessary investment in infrastructure needed to meet both the house building and economic goals?
Well, we're making and have been making the case to government in the run-up to the CSR. At the end of the day, to get anywhere near 500,000 in 10 years, let alone 880,000 in 10 years. Significant amounts of investment need to be made in infrastructure, whether that infrastructure is affordable housing or whether it's transport. I mean, I would say that something I have heard on the panel today I am doubtful of, and that is that Greenbelt is in any way cheaper than brownfield. To build properly in Greenbelt at the densities required to make it a continuation of an urban environment, to make it suitably dense, to justify the expenditure on transport to the Treasury, to enable it to be a sustainable development, not car-based, that's going to require serious investment. You know, the Greenbelt places generally, you know, if it has a road to it, there are not even pavements, let alone street lights, sewage, electricity supplies. So I think any idea that it's a cheap and quick fix is very mistaken. As I say, sorry to come back where I started, but the 880, the Greenbelt issue, is purely where does 880 go? It's almost, I'd venture actually, perhaps I'm going too far in saying this, but I'd say that it's almost an intellectual exercise until there's money to back up any delivery.
Thank you. Back to you, Chair.
Thank you. Just a final question from me. In your view, is there anything missing from the consultation document that you'd like to see included? Obviously, Jules, we might bypass you for this one. But we'll start with Ben and then go across.
Thank you. Just going to use the example of build to rent because it was mentioned by Zoe earlier, but where build to rent is mentioned, it's mentioned very positively. We've got some concerns about how affordable build to rent is, whether it's in the right places and trying to attract people that need housing the most. In relation to build to rent, the reason that London is so attractive for investors in build to rent is threefold, really. One is that most of us as renters are priced out of home ownership, so we're going to have to continue renting. Another reason is that there's a shortage of social housing, so those that need it aren't able to access it. And then the third is that we're a captive market that's got used to paying high rents. That's all the things that are making it very attractive to build to rent investors. So what's missing, I'd say, in the London plan is a bit of a 10-year strategy here to make sure that renters, private renters, aren't trapped in private renting and aren't just at the mercy of private investors that are going to make as much money out of us as possible, when really most of us are just looking for an escape into home ownership, into social housing, certainly not the risk of homelessness that currently is as the only way out.
I'm just finishing writing my response at the moment, and I think it covers pretty much every issue that I've been most concerned about. The housing numbers, the plan period, the potential to yield more dwellings from previously developed land, the viability issue that Jules Piper's referred to, particularly the problems around affordable housing delivery. It even talks about utilities, water and energy, which are rising up the agenda as potential problems that we will need to give greater attention to in the next London plan. If there's one issue where perhaps I would like to have seen perhaps more in-depth discussion, although it is mentioned, is this process around incremental densification, around train stations and the boundaries of town centres, which was a pivotal element of the current London plan. What is less clear is how successful that has been as a policy. I've been struggling to find any data about the yield from homes on small sites, that is quarter-hectare size sites, in PTAL areas 3 to 6 or near train stations and town centre boundaries. As you know, I mean, if the GLA, the mayor, wants to push that further as a policy, I think I'd like to see more evidence as to how effective it has been. But my one observation is, and I think the mayor will need to give this greater attention in the future, is the remarkable reluctance of the London boroughs to actually support that policy and to translate that into the local plans. You see many very prosperous areas of London with excellent public transport services, train stations and tube stations, who are very reluctant to allow incremental densification to occur, and I think that needs to be enforced better by the GLA in the future.
Thank you. Alice?
Yeah, so definitely the broader housing strategy, so in a much broader sense than just house building, we would really feel that that should be underpinning the London plan, and whether that is part of the consultation document or not is not, is perhaps difficult to say. But without that, it feels like it's not, it's not complete. We definitely feel like a playing pitch strategy, and at least the mention of the word sports would be good, and that's because, of course, if we're looking at a greenbelt, and indeed it looks like and feels like MOL, although it's not totally clear how that will happen, that playing pitch strategy is really, really important, but a sports strategy underpinning it as well. We've also, pushed for a kind of grey space strategy, which is about the amount of land in London that's given to roads, essentially carriageways. And there are certain places where, massive expansion happened in the 60s, 70s, 80s, where, we ended up with 3-lane roads with maybe a big middle to it as well. And like, for instance, there's a 9-lane road, at one point in Kensington and Chelsea, there's 9 lanes on the Cromwell Road. And that land actually, should it be there? Should it be something else? Could it be something else? Could it in fact be, in certain circumstances where you've got big roundabouts like where I am, Hackney Downs, there's a gigantic roundabout which is, which could actually long-term provide a large amount of housing if it was redeveloped. So grey space, we feel, is a really important one. It's different to brownfield. It's actually highways. And yeah, that's, I think, will be anything else we feel is missing, we'll let you know.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Chair, we constantly work with the Mayor of London's team, and we're happy to continue to feed back throughout the consultation. My key messages today would be that we support the Mayor's ambition. Density targets should be considered, especially for outer London boroughs like ours. Density is not the solution always. We do need to have a serious look at land that is designated green belt, but that could do with large family-sized social and affordable homes. The solution is not a roundabout in Hackney or a car park in Stevenage, because the problem is much bigger than that. And I think also there's got to be a bigger focus on growth and good jobs, because we're ready to build the data centres, the solar farms, the wind farms. We're ready to deliver and to create, produce and to build. We will continue to receive the government and the Mayor's support with that ambition. And it's got to be an infrastructure-first approach. We've already done an evidence-based We've done a pre-consultation, in fact, one of the first boroughs to do it. We started 7 years ago for our new local plan, a pre-consultation. So evidence-based, infrastructure first, listening to the residents, but also not ignoring a silent majority of people like me who desperately need family-sized homes, affordable ones.
Thank you. We have now reached the end of the session. I would like to thank all our guests for attending this meeting and for all your contributions today. The committee has a few more items of business to deal with, but please feel free to leave the chamber while we deal with those. Can I ask the committee to note the report and the discussion? Noted. Can we also delegate authority to me as chair in consultation with party group leads to agree any output arising from the discussion? Can I ask the committee to note the work programme and meeting dates as agreed by the London Assembly at its annual meeting on 6th of May 2025 and the additional activity undertaken since its last meeting as specified in the agenda report. The next meeting of the Planning and Regeneration Committee will take place on the 26th of June 2025 at 10 a.m. in committee rooms 2 and 3 City Hall. I have no urgent business, which concludes today's meeting.